I work night shift at a 1920s mental hospital. Obviously, countless people have died here for various reasons. Hangings, a murder-suicide beatings, accidental overdose, electroshock therapy, etc. There are 4 floors, with the 4th floor being the well-known hotspot for paranormal activity. Me being security, I have to check it out every once in a while. The 4th floor is essentially an extremely long hallway, approximately 1,800 steps. With housing units, each unit has a 5-inch thick steel door, and there's a window at the very end of the hall. They don't house patients due to the fact that the county took over a while before I started, and it's completely empty by the time 3rd shift rolls around. The 4th floor is also the only floor in the entire complex that is completely off the ground due to the complex being built into a hill. It is also where the electroshock therapy took place a long time ago. This occurrence happened last Wednesday on 3rd shift. I wanted to do a walk through the 4th floor that night around 3 a.m. for no reason other than I was feeling brave. I walk all the way down to the window. Eventually, as I got closer, I started seeing that the window obviously needs cleaning. When I got about 5 feet away, all of a sudden there was a handprint that would have been extremely noticeable from even 15 feet away. I looked at the handprint, turned around, said nope, and walked back down the hall. On my way back from the window, I peek into a side office area with my flashlight just to look. Nothing. Kept going. After a couple seconds, it sounded like someone was running up behind me, so I walked even faster because everything in my body said not to turn around. As I kept walking, I passed by a unit, and as I passed, I heard what sounded like someone punching the door. Put it up to paranoia due to the running I heard prior, that is until I passed another unit. Another loud thud, as if again someone had punched the door. So at this point I start speed walking down the hall, and while I am, I hear footsteps following mine. Mind you, these units are not connected at all, and again, the entire floor is completely empty. That's just one of my experiences. I have also been having dreams of a white, skinny woman in a hospital gown that has black hair with bangs in her face. I always thought she was just a reoccurring person in my dreams, until I talked with one of the CNAs that worked tonight in the kids unit. I never brought her up to the CNA. We were just talking about ghosts, and she said that numerous people have said that they've seen the exact woman that I had just explained. We were just talking about ghosts, and she said that numerous people have said that they've seen the exact woman that I just explained. I then explained to the CNA in detail about how she looked in my dreams, and she just went pale, and her mouth hung open. Supposedly, this ghost is extremely well known throughout the hospital by various people. People have seen her in mirrors, have been locked in bathrooms, and have seen her just walking around. But in my dreams, she always just appears, or runs up to me, grabs me, and screams in my face. There was this one dream in particular where I woke up from a dream to wake up in my duplex's stairway. I walk down the stairs, because that's where my bedroom is, and walk into my bedroom. Once in there, I see my bed, my fiancé sleeping on her side of the bed, and myself also sleeping. In front of my closet, which is on my side of the bed, I see that same woman standing next to my body, just staring at me. I walk up to her, and I get the courage to ask her just who the hell she is. She looks at me, grabs me, screams in my face, then shoves me onto my bed, which is when I officially woke up at 3:15 a.m. I have no clue who this woman is at all, but I still dream about her every now and then. Every single dream is in a different place, but she's just there, and this has been going on since I started working at my job. I totally forgot about this happening until my mom brought it up at dinner tonight. And now it's 9:30 at night, and I'm scared all over again. This was back in high school, either my freshman or sophomore year. I missed the bus, and I didn't have a car at the time, so my mom had to drive me to school. The road my tiny neighborhood, more like a glorified cul-de-sac, was off of was a long stretch that had only one equally tiny other neighborhood and a few houses here and there. It was 6 a.m. or something and still dark outside, and it was colder than a witch's tit. As we were pulling out of the neighborhood, my mom and I both saw these 3 children in blue and white private school uniforms standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder at the entrance of the neighborhood on the sidewalk. It was either 2 girls and 1 boy or 2 boys and 1 girl. I didn't remember the ratio, but the girls wore a blue and white skirt/dress outfit and the boy wore a blue short-sleeved shirt with khaki shorts. This was weird for a few reasons. 1, it was 40 degrees outside. They looked like they were dressed for the summer, and they didn't even wear coats or anything. Secondly, there were 2 schools in the area, but not a private school till the next town over, and the blue and white weren't the school's uniform colors. Third, what young kids just stand there in a single file line not doing anything but staring? No joshing around, no nothing? Yeah, right. Lastly, this wasn't where the bus stop was. It was a few blocks down. Just a sprinkle of extra creepy on top. There weren't any streetlights. They were just standing there in the dark, not doing jack except for being creepy as hell. They were on the corner on the right, closest to the passenger side where I was obviously sitting. And of course, we were turning right. As we got closer, I thought that at first they didn't have faces, but it was just too shadowy and dark out, and the headlights only shone under their shoulders, which is how I can remember the outfits so vividly. Then we got closer, and I was relieved to see that they did have faces, but then got completely freaked all over again when I saw that their eyes were all black. Like supernatural Sam and Dean fighting demons, all black. My mom saw it before I did, and she put the pedal to the metal and hightailed it out of there. I remember trying to look back and see them, but I couldn't since it was too dark. My mom didn't go back home until the sun rose, and it was bright enough to not be afraid anymore. Of course, no one believed me at school, and my siblings thought we were just full of it, but we know what we saw. We never saw them again after that, though. I thought that they were spirits, but after a few months, I heard about the black-eyed children on YouTube, or something that made the connection. We moved shortly after that due to unrelated reasons. This was 3 or 4 years ago, and I had blissfully forgotten all about it until my mom said, "Hey, remember when?" And now I want to die. I hope that my irrational anxieties and fear around children that are small enough for me to punt across the soccer field is amusing at least. I have a few stories that I can't explain, but this is the one that I feel I need to share because it happens to align with a type of experience that so many people have reported throughout the years, arguably since ancient times. I'd always been certain of what I saw, but when I first became aware of shadow people as a commonly reported phenomena, any doubt that I had about the incident disappeared. So many people have tried to tell me that what I experienced was just a dream or simply brushed it off with that look that says this guy is either nuts or lying. And honestly, it's time that people start taking victims of paranormal visitation at their word. In an age where we're starting to wake up to the fact that victims of all forms of abuse deserve a voice and representation, it's sad to see that so many people are disregarded as mentally ill or confused just because their experience lacks an accredited scientific explanation. My experience was not as extreme as some that I've heard from others on various paranormal forums and podcasts, but it has affected my life in a number of ways, and to have the source of so many anxieties and frustration in your life disregarded as a dream or a fiction leaves a person feeling very alone, unable to really explore their trauma, because the subject is so taboo and very few people are willing to take your account seriously and help you search for answers. This is my story, and I assure you I have nothing to gain by bringing you a false account. I just want to put my testimony out there so that other experiencers can know that they are not alone and that they are, probably at least, not crazy. There are things in this life that do not yet have a scientific explanation, and humanity is not the only sentient intelligence that operates in this world. Beyond that, I really don't know a damn thing. But accepting the fact is the first step in beginning to fully understand the nature of this world, or any others that may exist. The first time I saw it, I was about 8, maybe as old as 10. I was living in a dingy little house in Clear Lake, Iowa, in what you would consider to be the trashier part of a small tourist town. My room was at the end of a long hallway, on the right side of the hall if you were looking toward it from the kitchen on the opposite end. Across the hall, the left side, was my toddler sister's room, and in the middle of the hall on the left was the door to my parents' room. One morning I got out of bed and started to move toward the kitchen. When I was just about at my parents' door, looking toward the kitchen, the figure appeared. It sort of leaned into the hall from the living room, which was adjacent to the kitchen. It was a tall, black figure. Black as in pitch black, but sort of smoky and hazy, like it was just a bunch of compressed black smoke molded into a human form. Everyone seemed tall to me as a kid, but this thing certainly seemed taller than my parents, who were about 5'5" and 5'6" respectively. The only distinguishable feature on the being were that it had 2 glowing red eyes, just like circular LEDs, on its face. They didn't really seem to be the size and shape that a human eye really is, but truly round and glowing very brightly. This detail I'm sort of fuzzy on, but that's what I recall. From the moment it leaned into view, the thing was just watching me, and when I saw it, I stopped and watched it back. I wasn't exactly scared, but had the distinct impression that this was all it was there to do. To watch. I knew that this wasn't something that I should be seeing in the real world, and I was uncomfortable, but all in all, the thing was non-threatening and didn't make any advancements on me. It just stood there for a minute or two, and then leaned back out into the living room. I didn't follow it to see if it had disappeared. I just went back to my room until my parents woke up. I never, quote-unquote, woke up from this experience. My day progressed seamlessly into a normal day. I knew that this was not a dream because I was very familiar with my dreams. I had constant night terrors in this house, but I'll get into that later on. The point being, the kinds of dreams that I had were more distinctly bizarre and surreal than this experience, and I always woke up with an understanding that what I had experienced that night was just a dream. This was not the case that morning. If I was dreaming that morning, then I'm still dreaming, because like I said, I never woke up from it. The second experience was just as brief, but a bit more menacing. I can't say how much time passed between the two events, but this incident was dead in the middle of the day, full daylight with other people in the house going about their daily business. My mother was in the living room, and I had just walked into the kitchen and toward the hall. I was now standing approximately where the figure had been on the first occasion, looking down toward my room and my sister's. Suddenly, the figure appeared. This is where it gets really bizarre, because the thing actually crept out of my room. I mean, this effing thing was literally creeping, like some old-school Scooby-Doo villain walking on tiptoes with its arms raised and hands bent toward the floor. If you get what I'm illustrating here, you should probably laugh, because it was just as goofy as it sounds. It crept from my room into my sister's room, which is what really freaked me out by this event. The whole thing was over in just a few seconds. Moving in this bizarre manner, it had its head turned toward me the entire time. From the moment that it crossed the threshold of my door, its eyes were already on me, as if to say, yeah, I'm here, straight creeping around your house, and there's nothing you can do about it. No one's gonna believe you. I had already told my mom about the first sighting, and of course she had dismissed it as a dream or my overactive imagination. So I didn't bring it up, but I was really scared that it had some sinister intentions with my sister. I do remember her having some nightmares around this time, which I heard from my room, her crying to my mom about how the quote-unquote creature from the Black Lagoon was standing in the corner of her room. I asked her about this years later, but she doesn't remember any details on that. So that's it. That's all I saw of this shadow person. But there's another element to my life at this house that I feel might be relevant to what I experienced. As I mentioned earlier, I was prone to night terrors while living in this house. Vivid but bizarre nightmares that almost always had something to do with being chased by various demons, monsters, etc. One recurring type of dream I had went like this. I'd be laying in my bed, everything seeming to be completely normal in my room, as it was in waking life, but I would get this feeling. It was this instinctual understanding that something horrible was about to come through my door. I would start to panic, but would be unable to move my body, so rather than use my arms and legs to physically leave my bed, I would, through a sheer force of will, hover off of my bed and float to the corner of the ceiling, as out of reach as possible. Nothing else was really different about my room and these experiences except for that dread. The dread that something was trying to get in. Another night I had a similar dream, where I woke up in my familiar room to find a tall, hairy man standing above me, reaching for me. I had the strong sense that this skinny, ape-like man was there to take me, and I recall doing my best to resist him, but the ending to that dream is fuzzy. That scares me to this day, more than the shadow person encounters, because the hairy men are a pretty common occurrence in high strangeness research, so I can't help but worry that there was some reality to that experience. I bring these dreams up because it seems that vivid nightmares in certain locations, this happened only in that house, that also have reported paranormal activity, indicates a relationship between the two. If you subscribe to the idea that these beings feed off of fear, then it seems plausible that the two are connected. I was born a twin, but my twin sister died at birth. So did all 6 children my parents had after me. Those died pretty early into the pregnancy, so it was mostly miscarriages. My twin was the only one who took a few breaths before passing. I'm the only one who survived and grew up to be the adult I am today. I only lived in one house during my entire lifetime, until recently when I got to finally move out. There's good reason for that. I learned about my siblings, especially my twin sister, when I was 14 years old. But when I was a first grader, I would wholeheartedly believe that I wasn't an only child, and tell my teachers and the other children about my sister who I was playing with and sharing a room with. By the way, I don't have actual memories of this, because no one was there. But I didn't lie for attention. I genuinely believed that. I had a fair share of trauma and mental illnesses in my life already, so when I started to hallucinate disfigured shadows and children in my house at age 12, I went to see a therapist, and it was deemed a symptom of my PTSD. The shadows would form a kind of uncanny young girl's shape most of the time. Until recently, I just discovered these hallucinations were side effects of my admittedly fragile mental state, since the encounters really scared me. Sometimes it even felt like it would talk to me in a weird, unfriendly way. They stopped at the age of 14, when my mother finally told me about my siblings. But still on the staircase to my room and around the dinner table where those things appeared, I would feel watched or even chased, especially at night. Sometimes when I'm awake late, I hear footsteps up the stairs to my room, but they just stop in front of the last step, and don't go back down, but seemed to start from the bottom again a few minutes later. This changed when I got together with my boyfriend. He started sleeping over and spending more time at the house naturally, and I never told him about my scary encounters. So when we were still up at night and the footsteps occurred, which I had learned to ignore quite well, he looked up from his phone screen, clearly alerted, and my stomach dropped. He's a skeptic, so after he mentioned how the sounds were weird, he quickly got his mind off of it. A few weeks later, my boyfriend went to the bathroom at night. In the morning, he told me how weird he felt walking up the stairs. He felt like someone was watching or chasing him. I never told him about how I always felt this exact thing when I walk up those stairs. Those occurrences with him started piling up, until I got genuinely terrified of staying longer than necessary in that godforsaken house. Right after I turned 18 earlier this year, I started working my hardest to afford to move out. And I finally did it last week. So far, I haven't had scary encounters in my new home. Something is telling me that it was her the whole time. Since I was a child, she's been tormenting me. The way my skeptic boyfriend experienced it, the same exact way, without knowing, convinced me. I am not crazy. In 2017, my girlfriend and I moved into a tiny, kinda crappy house in our college town. The house was made by a couple of students a few years prior, so the architecture was a bit sloppy. For example, the roof was flat. Take note of this because it'll be important later. However, the house was really cheap and close to campus, so it seemed like a total steal. The first couple months living there, nothing out of the ordinary happened, but it wasn't too long before we began experiencing strange paranormal activities. The first odd occurrence was with our smoke detectors. Our smoke detectors would go off constantly. It was strange because they would go off even if there wasn't smoke in the house, from our bad cooking, for example. We thought that maybe it was because of old batteries, but no matter how many times we changed them, it never made a difference. It got to the point where they were going off 3 to 5 times a day, and at that, we just broke down and took the batteries out of them altogether. Note, there were 6 detectors in total. However, even without the batteries, the detectors were still going off. So out of desperation, we turned off the entire smoke detector circuit to the house. It was at this point when things started getting really out of control. The back room/storage room in the house always had a really eerie feeling, like someone was watching you or standing just behind you staring down at you. Thankfully, me and my girlfriend's bedroom was the furthest room in the house away from the storage area, so I avoided it like the plague. Anyways, one night around 3 a.m., the smoke detector in our bedroom goes off. However, it's not the usual repetitive beeping, it's a single, long beep. It sounded like when someone holds the test button on a detector. Frustrated, my girlfriend grabs a chair from the dining room and stands on it to reach the detector, but moments before she touches it, the beeping stops. We both groan in irritation as she goes to put the chair back, but before she makes it to the dining room, the detector down the hallway from our room makes the same continuous beep. Just like before, she stands on the chair to reach the detector, but right before grabbing it, it stops. Our smoke detectors continued this pattern all the way back to the creepy storage room. This happened 2 more times that night. It was as if whatever was messing with us was trying to lead us to its space. This would happen to us at least once or twice a week for the next 1.5 years that we lived there. Shortly after the encounters with the smoke detectors, the house became absolutely infested with bugs. There was no history of bug issues when we bought the home, and it started almost immediately after our first experience with the detectors. Bugs would pour out of light fixtures, small cracks in the walls, counters, and of course, the smoke detectors. Literally 1 minute everything would be fine, and then the next, winged insects or ants would pour out of the walls. We had multiple exterminators come, but less than a week after treating the house, the bugs would be back, just as bad as before. It made us miserable, and I've never seen an infestation to that extreme. It was absolutely unnatural. After these events, we began feeling really terrified and depressed. We both hated being home, but there was no other place for us to go. This was when the footsteps started. Remember how I said our roof was flat? At least a few times a week we would hear large, heavy, possibly hoof-like footsteps on the roof. We tried writing it off as being animals, so whenever we heard the steps we would run outside to see if we could spot whatever the animal was. But there was never anything there. The steps were very far apart from one another. Whatever was walking on our roof would start from the creepy storage room and in maybe 3 or 4 steps walk to our bedroom. The steps were so loud that it sounded like whatever was haunting us was either very big or stomping to get our attention. Now began the phantom sounds. We had large metal bowls that we used for daily cooking, so when we were done we would wash them and set them on the counter to dry. The first time it happened, me and my girlfriend were sitting on the couch in the living room. The kitchen was right next to the living room, but there was an island that blocked our view to the sink area. Anyways, on this night we were startled by the sound of our multiple metal bowls being thrown off of the counter. At this time we didn't have pets, so we assumed the worst and thought that someone might be breaking into the house. We both shot up and ran over to face our worst fear, but not only was no one in the house, nothing in the kitchen had been moved. The bowls were still on the counter, just where we left them. This was the most common paranormal occurrence in the house, and it happened at least 5 to 10 times a day at all hours. After a while, we were so sick and tired of these disturbances that we stopped using our metal bowls, or if we did use them, we would hand dry them and put them away right after use. This didn't make the spirit very happy, so next, we started hearing what sounded like our ceramic plates being thrown to the ground, and our kitchen cabinets slamming over and over again. Do you know those types of cabinet hinges that close slowly? Yeah, that's what we had. So, to slam the cabinets like that, they would have had to have been closed with excessive force. The next phase in our haunting was sightings and photographs. The phone I had at the time had one of those automatic face tracking features, meaning that when you would take pics on my phone, the yellow boxes would appear around the person's face to focus on them. One night I was taking a picture in me and my girlfriend's bedroom when a yellow face tracker square appeared at the foot of our bed, way above our bed. If that was a person, they would have had to have been at least 7 feet tall. At the time, we did have posters on our bedroom walls, so while focusing on the face tracker square, I circled the room to confirm that the tracker wasn't just focusing on one of them by accident. To my dismay, no matter where I was in the room, or from what angle, the square stayed in the exact same place. Oh yeah, even better, I was home alone for a few nights. I don't think I've ever experienced such sheer terror as I did when I went to sleep that night. After this first encounter, having cameras track faces in our pictures became a constant occurrence all throughout the house. The final phase of our haunting before getting the heck out of there was physical encounters. This happened more often to my girlfriend than me, but something would occasionally grab and pull our hair, especially when we were walking through the living room. But the most terrifying experience goes to our friend Jamie. She came to visit us for a few nights, and while she was there, she would sleep on our couch. She was aware of all the paranormal encounters in the house, and she had seen most of them firsthand, but nothing compared to what was about to happen. It was around 3 a.m. when she woke up with an eerie, uncomfortable feeling. All of a sudden, she experienced what felt like someone or something stepping up onto the couch. It stepped both of its feet up, one on either side of her body. Starting from her feet, it slowly walked up the length of her body until it felt like 2 feet were on either side of her head. She said she felt an intense, malevolent energy staring down at her, but she was too terrified to open her eyes. Meanwhile, the cabinets in the kitchen began to slam over and over. For the next few hours, she pretended to be asleep all the while this presence was standing over her. She told me she's not exactly sure when it went away, because she eventually became so exhausted that she did fall back asleep. Not too long after this experience, we were finally able to sell the house and get the heck out. We lost tons of money because we sold it for way less than we had originally paid. I can't help but feel bad for the person who bought the home, but it's been almost 3 years and she's still living there. I think the takeaway from this story is if a house is priced too good to be true, then it is. I worked at a small, old hospital for a couple of years. 4 floors, only 2 floors being used, and a small ER. I was a med-surg RN working 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Med-surg meant that we had patients who just had surgery, and also patients who were just sick. Most of the patients were elderly and just sick with things like pneumonia, anemia, acute kidney failure, etc. When older folks get sick, they tend to get confused and might do or say things that they normally wouldn't. But this, whatever the hell it was not cool. This was mortifying, and I'm the only one who heard it. We joked that because the hospital was so old that it was creepy, specifically on the right wing of our unit, and obviously at night. Guess who got assigned the right wing that night? I got bedtime meds ready for the old folks down there, and started walking down the hall with my med cart and charts for each patient. I'd received report from the previous day's RN that room 214 was a woman, call her Kathy, who was only 55 and in for pneumonia, completely alert and oriented. I give the patients down there their meds one by one, and yeah, I'm tired and mildly annoyed that it takes room 216 over 10 minutes to swallow a plethora of pills one by one, and then proceeded to pull out his IV that was delivering his antibiotics. I digress. So needless to say, it took me a little bit longer to get to room 214. She didn't seem upset, just tired. I did my assessment, and she was, in fact, oriented to day, time, name, and location. I said goodnight after hanging another bag of fluids. I'm hanging out in the hall with my computer documenting my assessments, and I hear something that shook me. It sounded like whispering, but I heard more than one person doing it. I cocked my head up to hear better. I mean, it's night shift and I'm tired, so I'm making sure that I actually did hear this. I followed the noise to the outside of Kathy's room, and there seems to be a full-blown whispery conversation going on with multiple people. I couldn't make out what the different voices were saying, but it sounded like chanting of some sort. I had to make sure that I was legitimately hearing these whispers that seemed like they were coming from different people, and try to make sense of it. I walked slowly past her door, which was slightly cracked open. Hoping to hear things more clearly, the whisper chanting sounds only got louder, but were still unintelligible. Kathy, who had been tucked in bed and dozing off when I saw her less than 7 minutes ago, was now sitting straight up on the side of her bed, looking away from me at the wall. Doesn't sound that scary, right? Well, Kathy was unable to lift herself out of bed without assistance during my assessment. She was having labored breathing when I assessed her. Now Kathy has pulled her nasal cannula out of her nose, that plastic thing that goes around your face that has the 2 spouts that go up your nose to give you extra oxygen, and sat up in bed in less than 7 minutes without struggle, and then she stood up, still looking away. She turned and walked to the bathroom, still without seeing me. Because she was labeled a fall risk, she shouldn't be out of bed alone. I saw her profile, and her lips were not moving, but the whispers grew louder. I panicked, but kept my cool. I briskly walked to the nurse's station and asked if a nursing assistant could please help Kathy with the restroom. I normally would do it myself, but I was rather busy and Kathy was doing quite well on her own. I was sweating, freaking out, and getting further behind on my charting. The nursing aide helped Kathy and didn't report anything unusual when I asked her how she was doing. I swear I heard those voices. They were unsettling, to say the least. I requested the left wing as often as possible after that, and eventually went on to work at a larger hospital. The story I'm about to tell you takes place including myself, my mother, and my younger sister. We were in St. Francisville, Louisiana, staying at the infamous Myrtles Plantation. I'm aware that when it comes to touristy haunted places, the paranormal events that may occur there are questionable regarding the issue of their validity. As such, I tend to err on the side of caution with my own beliefs, and I always do a thorough check of wherever I'm staying. I keep a lookout for artificial motors, wires, basically anything that can cause things to happen that may seem paranormal. The cabin that we stayed in was clear. We arrived at the plantation around 2 p.m. that first day. We were given a complimentary tour of the grounds. I was getting vibes all over the place. It was pretty insane from the moment that I stepped foot on that soil, to be honest. I state the bit about getting vibes with emphasis on the fact that I do get vibes. Sometimes. Rarely. And never that strong. After the tour was finished, we were shown to our rooms, we were let in, and left to our own devices. I did my evaluation on the room, then afterward noticed that any time I neared the back door, I picked up on energy even more strongly than I had been during the tour of the rest of the grounds. I just felt that something had happened there, and I knew that I had to find out what. It was about 5 p.m. by that point, and understandably, we were getting pretty hungry. We left the plantation to go into town and get some dinner. We got back around 6:30, and were walking back over to our cabin when a friendly woman that we'd seen earlier walked over to us. She asked if we wanted to see her room. It was located in the actual plantation house, whereas we were staying in what would have originally been one of the slave cabins. We said yes, of course, so she took us up there. We looked around, and at first there was nothing noticeable as far as feelings or energy goes. Then I went into the bathroom. It was the most awful, oppressive atmosphere in there. It was creepy and terrible, and I hated it instantly. I just wanted to leave. I didn't necessarily think that something had happened there, rather that something inhabited that space. And I knew that it was not something kind. We didn't stay very long. Maybe 15-20 minutes later, we went back to our cabin and settled in for the night. Lots of vibes in that cabin, and my sister and I, we were somewhat younger at the time, shared a bed because we were scared. We stayed up late playing a game. When midnight rolled around, we decided that it was probably best to put it away and go to bed. As soon as we had put the game up and silence set in, however, I noticed a sound. The rocking chair on the front porch was creaking as it moved, backward, forward, backward, forward, hard enough that I could be certain that the wind was not responsible. I freaked out a little bit, but decided that I wasn't going to mention it to my sister. It would probably just scare her. We laid down for the night. She got to sleep quick. I, on the other hand, was having sleep issues. Nothing but thoughts and worries running through my mind. The moment I heard footsteps on the stones outside of our cabin, though, all of those pesky voices became irrelevant. Keep in mind, our cabin was fenced in, so it couldn't have been anyone who didn't have the key. Regardless, I heard the footsteps, and they continued as I heard the light slapping sounds of feet on the wooden porch along with the groan of someone's weight. They continued forward, right through the door, and I heard as whoever it was passed right by my bed. The whole time, I saw nothing. The footstep sounds made their way across the room to the wall, then out the back door. I will say that while I saw nothing, I did smell something. It was as though someone were wearing rosehip perfume, trailing the scent along behind them everywhere they walked. This event took place at about 1 in the morning. Already having trouble getting to sleep, I didn't rest until 2.5 hours later, approximately 3:30 a.m. When we got up the next day, we went into the main house for breakfast, where we heard stories from other campers about their experiences. Theirs were equally intriguing, including people who felt a presence sit down on their bed in the middle of the night, and a person coming out of a cabin to tell people to be quiet. Yet the cabin in question was totally devoid of anyone alive. We ate, shared our stories, and returned to our cabin. We sat there for a while playing games on our tablets, just relaxing really, as it was a nice room despite its history and the fact that it was haunted. I can't remember why, but my sister and mom got into an argument. The disagreement obviously didn't sit well with whatever spirits were occupying the cabin, because they were both interrupted by the faucet in the bathroom being turned on full force, and then back off again. It startled all three of us. We cleared out of the cabin in less than 30 seconds after that. That is the end to my Myrtles Plantation story. I am never going to forget how terrifying that it was to be awake by myself in a cabin in the middle of nowhere and suddenly realize that you are not alone. I used to work as a cleaner when I was 16 and between colleges. This is the UK, so I had already left school. The place where I worked was a popular clothing store near my house and was built over ancient farmland. There were also rumors of druid burial grounds nearby, but that's another story. I've always been sensitive to the paranormal from a very young age, but this was by far the most haunted place I've ever worked, and my first apparition sighting. We were a team of 4 to 5 people, and all of us were assigned to different parts of the store. One of the sections was the women's fitting rooms. We would vacuum the rugs and cubicles, polish the mirrors, and all of that. You would hear high heels on the tiles the whole time that you were down there, and the sounds of rustling paper, coat hangers rattling, that kind of thing. There was also a general feeling of discomfort and unease, as though you were being followed and watched. This is hours before the store opened, so of course there were no customers. Sometimes a manager would be there, but they stayed upstairs in the office. The next part was the men's clothing area, which was on the 2nd floor. When you cleaned there, you were alone but for the occasional manager walking through. One time I was on the floor cleaning the railings by the cash registers, and a huge black shadow swept over me. I was surprised because I hadn't heard anybody approach, and as I looked around, I was definitely alone. My cleaning routine was to sweep the floor and collect the dirt into little piles around the pillars, then sweep it up all in one go at the end. The dirt piles moved constantly. I would go back to do the final big sweep, and some of the piles always would have disappeared. After I clocked out, the piles would be there again. I had a sense that the spirit was a young male farmhand who was very mischievous. I said as much to my coworker, and she told me that she refuses to clean in that area after polishing the mirrors one day and seeing the disembodied head of a young man peering over her shoulder. Aside from my instances with the piles, I would always hear the sound of coat hangers rattling and shuffling noises, but I never felt threatened by it. I used to laugh it off or just tell the spirit to stop, and he would most of the time. Now, after the store was clean, we would clean the staff quarters. Toilets and canteen, meeting rooms. The toilets were a non-paranormal horror in themselves. Note, I worked here with my mother. We were assigned to clean the female toilets, and usually if someone was using them, we would leave and give them privacy until they finished. So we went in, the middle stall was closed, and we heard rustling paper and heavy breathing. So we left and waited. And waited. And waited. The cleaning cupboard was right next to the toilets, and didn't even have a door. We would have seen and heard anybody who might have left. To leave and enter the toilets, you would have to walk straight past the open doorway and then walk down the corridor that directly faced it. It was an L-shaped corridor, with the toilets on the far end and the cleaning cupboard on the corner. Except when we went in after waiting 10 to 15 minutes, the middle stall door was wide open and empty. Now, on to the apparition. The children's clothing area was generally less creepy. There were coat hangers moving again. Sometimes things would fall off the shelves and rails, but we always just shrugged it off. The elevator was directly opposite the children's clothing, and we usually loaded our cleaning equipment into the elevator because it was too heavy to carry up the stairs. I remember rinsing my mop out, and I glanced up. There was a little boy around 6 or 7 years old, standing directly in front of me. He wore a flat cap, a pale shirt with suspenders, dark shorts, and socks up to his knees. At first I thought it was a mannequin, and when I blinked, he was gone. I thought I was just tired, and I shook my head. I spoke to my mother about it later, as she's Wiccan and super into the supernatural, and I described the boy to her. She had seen the exact same child a few weeks before, but only the back of him, as if he had been walking around a corner. She told me that she had the feeling he had died of lung-related issues, perhaps tuberculosis or pneumonia. So there you have it. Some of it can be explained by tiredness, I know, but I just thought I would share this experience. All the guards at my workplace know this theater is haunted. We're all used to the super eerie feelings down in the lower levels, backstage areas. Most of it can be passed off as long work hour stress, but there is definitely some evil shit in this building with us. It's probably an entity that's latched itself onto themes like theatrics and whatnot. I don't know. We got all kinds of stories. We have all heard the grand piano playing on its own in the night, heard ghostly voices arguing every now and then as we walk through the halls. Sometimes I smell a harsh burning in the halls at night, like sulfur. We all know that doesn't mean well. Tonight has been the worst it's ever been. I heard a door slam shut nearby as I was patrolling, and as a joke, I yelled out, "Who it be?" Inside joke with me and my friends to lighten my nerves. And I heard a deep, almost unintelligible male voice saying, "It be me." Sounds kind of funny, but I did not enjoy that. My Bluetooth headphones blatantly refused to work tonight. I also walked through one of the function halls in the darkness. Once the building closes, we patrol without many lights on, other than the occasional safety lights here and there. And I saw something following me in the mirror. I refused to look behind me, or stare at the mirror too long, but it appeared to be a figure clearly dressed in the costume of like a king, with a fur robe and a black jagged crown. Its head was tilting side to side as it shuffled along behind me, kind of like a wind-up toy. It moved so soundlessly that I was pretty startled by it. I couldn't feel my legs out of dread, so I didn't even stop walking. I just stopped looking immediately, and calmly kept the same pace on my way out of the room, pretending to see nothing. I think this is happening due to the current performance of a really old and famous play called Faust. A very famous actor died performing it here in Melbourne a long time ago in another theater nearby, and his ghost allegedly haunts the theater to this day. It's not far down the road from our theater. There is also a secret warehouse on the site, the location of which, for obvious reasons, we do not share with the public. But this warehouse is basically a storage room full of really old and valuable artifacts that have to do with early modern theater and music. Authentic historical pieces like 18th century instruments and old chests and trunks that belong to people of fame. One-of-a-kind tapes recorded by famous rock and blues musicians, old stage set models, some dating back all the way to the 1800s. It's crazy. I know for a fact that some of these old artifacts bring with them the presence of beings potentially even older than they are. You couldn't pay me to open some of these creepy-looking trunks. Safe to say, I'm glad I'm casual now and no longer work full-time. I've been working here for almost a year. It's hands down the most haunting place that I have ever experienced. It's been 4 or 5 years since my last encounter. I think I'm safe, right? Wrong. I moved last year and I recently thought, hey, remember those kids a few years ago? Funny, they can't get you now. Boy, was I ever incorrect. I live on a mountain, and like an hour away from the beach in a super populated neighborhood with my roommates. 2 chill lesbians and a college dude. Super cool people. I think nothing can hurt me now, because there are people everywhere. But no, I'm stupid and jinx myself. I was home 2 days ago. Class was canceled, and the dude of the house was home too and taking a nap. I'm in the kitchen watching Netflix and doing homework when there's a knock on the window. Obviously, this is weird as hell, but I have weird as hell friends. Maybe one of them are trying to scare me. I brush it off and continue what I was doing, and then it happens again. Once again, I brush it off because maybe it was the snow if it wasn't one of my friends. Things like this happen all the time with them. Well, it goes on for about 10 minutes, and I'm kinda starting to freak out. My friends don't have this much patience. I go to Charlie's room, the guy, and wake him up. I'm not the one that's usually riled up, so he's concerned too. We both go to the window. I have my phone out with the camera and 911 within a touch, and Charlie has a bat. We look out the window, and no one is there. After a minute, we calm down and go and sit in the living room. Charlie's mom is a cop, so he says he'll tell her about it later. We think we're okay, so we chill and watch TV together. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rings. I go and open the door. At first, I don't see anything. Then, down on the bottom of the stairs of the apartment, I see 3 young boys dressed in black hoodies, jeans, with brown or black bangs. At first I didn't move, I was frozen in place. Then Charlie asked who it was, and I came to my senses and got a good look at the kids, then slammed the door shut behind me. I started bawling, and I mean sobbing. I had no clue what to do. Charlie's freaking out because I don't cry, especially in front of people like that. He ran to the door with the bat that we have on the windowsill and looked outside. He saw them too. He started freaking out because he didn't know what to do, so he started yelling at them to leave. He said they started smiling. I was crying even more now, and he was still screaming, and I think the neighbors wanted to call the cops. Now think about this. He didn't know what they were. He thought they were normal kids that had scared me. He didn't see their eyes yet. I started yelling at him to go inside when I hear a bunch of footsteps running up the stairs and Charlie screams and runs in. He's telling me he saw their eyes and that they were black, and now we're both freaking out and grabbing kitchen knives. Eventually we calm down and look outside again. No one's there, but we can see a group of kids past the complex with 3 that we think might have been the BEKs. I told him about the other thing that happened to me, and now we're scared to be in this house. We told the other roommates, and they thought we were high or something, so once again, no one believes me. This happened about 3 days ago, and I've been on edge ever since. I'm a logical person, and I do consider myself a skeptic, even though I know what I saw, and I know that it really happened. Maybe it's just that I tend to be skeptical about most things. I will, as briefly as I can, describe a little history of the house and the changes my family made to it, because I believe that it applies to what I experienced. I'm originally from a small farming town in Washington State. My parents bought a ranch-style house in this town in the early 1980s, and we lived there until early 1993. The house was built in the mid-1950s, and was known as a party house in the 1970s when my parents were in high school. My parents did a lot of work on the house, as it was a little run down when they bought it. There were many holes punched in the walls and doors. The original hardwood floors were in rough shape, and the family room and original master bedroom had disgusting, torn, brown and lime green shag carpeting. The original master bedroom also had wood paneling on the walls. We tore out all the paneling and replaced the horrifying shag carpets with vinyl and new carpeting and renovated the bathrooms. The main change that my parents did to the house was they added a new master bedroom to the back of the house and converted the old master bedroom to a large laundry room / sewing and crafts room for my mom. The new master bedroom was added onto the other side of the master bedroom from the original master bedroom turned laundry room. I include all of this because during college, I mentioned what happened in this house to a friend of mine who was really into the paranormal, and he suggested that the renovations my parents did, in combination with it being a former party house where there had been drug use and possibly violence, had stirred something up. So one side of the house was set up as follows, from front to back. Family room, the new laundry room, the master bathroom, then the new master bedroom at the back. The kitchen was to the right of the family room if you were facing the door to the laundry room, and could be partially seen from the family room. Now to my experiences. The Void Man. I do not know how old I was when I first saw it, or how old I was when I last saw it. I lived in the house until just before my 8th birthday. I was between 5 and 7. That much I do know. I mostly saw it when I was in the family room. It would stand perfectly still in the doorway from the family room to the laundry room. It seemed to be staring at me, but it had no eyes. It was a pitch-black void in the shape of a human. There were no discernible facial or other body features on it. It was a body with a head on top. The outline of the body appeared to be slightly fuzzy or misty. I would say it was over 6 feet tall. I should also mention that no one who lived in the house was that tall. My mom was maybe 5'3", my dad is 5'7", and my brother was a toddler at this time, so it couldn't be me misremembering any of them. I would just stand there and stare back at it. I felt frozen and didn't know what to do or say. I felt like I couldn't speak if I wanted to when it was there. I remember feeling a sinking sensation when I saw it. I have one distinct memory of staring at it in the doorway to the laundry room, and I could see my mom working in the kitchen. She was standing at the stove and could have seen it if she had turned her head to her right. She did not notice it. I named it the Void Man at some point. Staring at it was like staring into a deep void, a void that would swallow me up. I don't remember feeling fear exactly when I saw the full shadow person. It was more that I couldn't feel anything. That was not the case for the other way that I would see it. It would like to peek its head around the door frames at me. It would do it several times in rapid succession. That would terrify me. I think that was its intention. I would usually go running off to my room or to go find my mom. I only ever saw the full body of the Void Man from the family room looking into the laundry room, but it would peek its head out at me from both of the laundry room doors. The one leading into the family room and the one leading into the master bathroom. If my parents ever saw anything, they had never mentioned it, and I have never mentioned it to them. I'm sure that there are those out there that will say, well, you were very young, you must be remembering wrong, or you made it up at some point and then it became real to you over time. I wish this was the case. I really do. But I remember the Void Man very vividly. I know that I saw this thing, whatever it was. We moved out of that house in 1993 and moved into one that we had built. I have never seen anything like what I did in that house ever again, but the experience has followed me my entire life. I have a nervousness about open doors, and what I might see on the other side. I've worked 3.5 years now as a psych tech at a unit that covers the southeast portion of my state. The unit I work on you can think of as the ER for psych. We admit individuals who are having mental breaks or who need help for self-harm, being disabled from their psych disorder, or harming others. The unit is freaking old, and has been around since the time of Moses, it seems. Even though weird events go on, it's a pretty awesome job helping others, and I love working here while I finish going to school. I will say to start out with, that most nights on the unit are really quite boring. Naturally, with the type of individuals that can stay here, the unit can have a change in its feeling rather quickly though. I've had individuals who I've never met before know strange things about me or other patients, such as where I've buried my dogs, names of family members, or the streets that I've grown up on. You'll get a weird vibe walking by certain patients. At times, my patients will say creepy stuff, such as being told the devil has sent its demons to watch me and not mess up. I witnessed a lady who came in for suicidal thoughts slowly progress to sitting in a corner and screaming "no, stop," till she couldn't talk. This lady shouted and shrieked the same phrases over and over in an empty room. The unit also has one room that I dislike because no matter who gets assigned to stay in that room, they always seem to get much worse before they get better. The room is always cold, even when the heat comes through the vent. I can recall 4 patients asking to switch rooms because the shadows in the room surround them when they sleep and buzz at them at night. My most recent experience was while doing my safety check in an unoccupied room which had the door open. Previously in the shift I knew it was locked because I had checked all the unused rooms to make sure that they were indeed closed and locked. I thought housekeeping had come up to clean the room possibly, since a patient was discharged from in there the night before. Next thing I knew, I had a soap bar and a shampoo bottle thrown at me. It wasn't a joke throw either, but a rip right at me. The door slammed shut. I think a patient is in there now. I open the door to a completely empty, clean room. I lock it up, pick up the soaps, and try to tell the other tech that I'm working with what had happened. We pull up the camera and sure enough you can watch that event unfold in the hall. Not all experiences are bad or evil on the unit. The patients will sometimes tell me that they had family that's passed on stay the night in their room and visit with them until they fall asleep. Another time I had one patient tell me that a giant white figure stood guard by their door and kept the shadow figures from coming in until they were finally able to doze off. We do have regular figures that walk the yard and hang out in the rooms. One we call the engineer because the figure is always being seen in the utility closet. The mysterious stranger resembles a character out of a game. He's a tall guy in a tannish trench coat and business hat walking the same path around 3 a.m. and disappears after he passes by a big elm tree. Before you come onto the unit, there's a fairly large gym to play basketball, lift weights, or exercise, which low-risk patients can use with a staff member. Before you come onto the unit, there's a fairly large gym to play basketball, lift weights, or exercise, which low-risk patients can use with a staff member. On my 4th meal break, I usually eat and do a little working out. The gym also has a radio to hook up your phone to and to jam some music. This particular time, I'm shooting hoops and listening to Metallica. My break ends, so I put the ball away and unplug my phone to leave. As the music cuts, I hear a soft voice say, "Keep playing." Similar story from a coworker from the same place. When she turned the music off, she heard someone picking up singing where the song had stopped. Apparently, they also enjoy music just as much as the rest of us. Before my best friends and I were separated, one passed away, the other moved away. We used to ride around doing all of the haunted legend places within reasonable driving distances. Sometimes we would drive for a few hours, but most of them weren't scary other than the adrenaline-filled, hyped up, "Did you hear or see that?" that would cause us to get spooked. This one was different. Way different. We were just out of high school, probably 20 at the most, and we were looking for an actually scary place to visit. A lot of people we knew that we were into these kinds of things, so we would always get tips on where to go. There was the original 3 of us that day and another friend that wanted to tag along. After a little drive to our destination, about 45 minutes, we stopped at a Wawa to get gas and grab a few snacks. Like I stated earlier, we were all about 20 at the time, so we were all hyped up because we knew that spooky time was getting close. We'd always pick on that other friend that tagged along. Nothing harsh, but just, "You're scared." So I believe it was me that said something along those lines that was overheard by a few people. It got the attention of other people in the Wawa, including these 2 creepy, older guys who seemed like they didn't fit in. Their clothes were all beat up and dirty, and they just didn't seem right for the area, and the time was probably 8 p.m. on a Saturday night. "What's the little one scared of?" asked one of them. I say little because the 3 of us are all abnormally tall. The shortest between us was 6'4", and he was normal, so probably about 5'9". We replied and explained how we got tipped to go to this road, because it's haunted. They replied that it wasn't scary, and if we wanted a real scare, we should go to this random road. I forget what it was called exactly, but apparently it's this random memorial statue for a plane crash in the middle of the woods, where crazy things are supposed to happen. We grabbed our stuff, didn't think anything of it. As soon as we left, the group started talking and decided to go with the other road that the guys had hyped up. I know. A typical horror movie what not to do. So we get to the entrance of the road, and already it did not disappoint. There were woods on both sides, not one street light in sight. And I remember there was this, detention center off to the right, in the middle of nowhere. So the spooks already began from the moment that we hit the entrance. We decided to drive down the road and search for the statue. We noticed that there were trees cut down on the side of the road and laying parallel to the shoulder of it. We finally find the statue. About 5 minutes go by in silence, and we decided to enhance the scare factor by shutting the lights off. About a minute goes by and we see a shadow figure pop up from the statue. We all freak out as it starts walking toward us, but it was making movements that no human would normally be capable of. It was dark out, but this thing was black. It was darker than the woodsy sky, so we could make out some of it. It was huge. Like I said earlier, we were all extremely large compared to the average guy, but this thing would have dwarfed any of us. We decided to peel out of there and continue down the road, figuring that it would lead us out. Boy, were we wrong. About 3 minutes go by, and we hit a dead end, which in this case was an open spot in the woods with sand everywhere. The cutout was massive, but surrounded by forest. There were different cutouts, and ways to go from there, and I'm pretty sure the road continued after this cutout, but we were pretty deep in the woods by that point. So we decided to turn around and leave, obviously. After we turn around, we stopped to just take in the eerie feeling. The other 3 guys were talking about the shadow figure that we saw earlier, while I happened to catch something out of the corner of my eye. About 40 feet away from me, I see what appears to be a white face, and then another, and another, all surrounding the car. The other guys didn't see them, and I'm rarely ever scared, but seeing me panic, they all knew that something was up. My panic caused them to panic. We then floored it far away from the sand turnaround. We get about half a mile down the road, somewhat near the statue, and pull over to gather our composure before we get out of there. When we stopped, I swear I heard the most typical ghosty ooh kind of noise. This was now turning into a movie I wish that I was never part of. We were really scared. After finding the way that we had come, we started heading back out. Remember those trees I talked about earlier? They were now laying in the middle of the road, blocking us in, as we all see the white faces or masks that I had seen earlier. Thank God my one friend, the driver, was good at driving and valued safety over his car. We drove on the edge of the woods and felt like we were defying gravity to speed our way out. The car was literally sideways on the edge of the forest. I mean, I could literally stick a single finger out the window and touch the trees. We all made it home safely that night. After doing research, we found out that that spot was notorious in that area for crazy things happening, such as body dumps and murders. Because of the shadow and the ghost noise that we heard, my head, heart, and gut tells me that that place is actually haunted. As previously stated, that place is famous for dumping bodies, along with the plane crash, so there's bound to be some spirits there. I think where we were that night was actually haunted, but we just happened to be there on a night when there were more things going on. I can't say for certain, but I'm 99% sure that we survived one of their setups that night. I'm 100% sure that I will never go back again. I was around 12 years old, and me and my friend were in the mountains. I can't recall the name of the village, but it was situated in the Czech Republic. We were on a hike and stumbled upon an old military station or bunker, just left there after World War II. We went home for flashlights and came back just before the sun was out. We went inside and found that it had like 2 or 3 floors underground, maybe more, with a 40-meter well full of frozen water on the ground floor. We decided to go down and explore. First floor, there was nothing unusual, just some empty concrete spaces. We went another floor down, and I saw some things on the ground that looked like dead rats from a distance. I laughed it off and went to take a closer look. They were bats, about 10 of them, just lying down, dead. They weren't like violently smashed or anything. There was no blood. It was as if they were just sleeping, not even rotten or decaying. I poked one with my foot, and the thing just rolled over. I started to get a little scared, but eager to explore further. My friend was basically halfway up the stairs at this point, nervous laughing, saying, "Yeah, we should really go. I have a bad feeling," or something like that. I was almost pulled to continue exploring. Half of me knew that it didn't feel right, but I ignored my friend and continued on. I was almost there, and I suddenly got sick in my gut. That feeling that's screaming in you, the adrenaline. I took another couple of stairs, shining with my flashlight ahead, and then I saw it. I scanned the whole floor, seeing the stairs that went even further below collapsed, so no getting further down. And as I looked across the room with my flashlight, there was a spot that it could not illuminate. In the middle of that spot, there stood the shadow of a man. The flashlight's beam just couldn't get through the form of it. It ate all of the light. I then realized how cold that it had become. I could see my breath. I was staring, paralyzed, for what seems like minutes, but was probably only a couple of seconds. The shadow got a little closer as I blinked. No need to say, I bolted like I never did before, not even caring if it was behind me or what it was. Just running for my life. I got to the entrance and my friend was looking at me horrified, and I just told him to run while rushing past him. We sprinted for about 5 minutes, then confirmed that yes, we were still alive. When we got home, he told me that he had seen something in the corner as I ran past him, so it wasn't just me. His father told us the next day that a lot of soldiers had died there, and there's even an army museum nearby. So was it the ghost of a soldier or a shadow person? This story takes place during the late summer in the 1960s in Iowa in a very small farming community. My friend's great-grandpa, Bob, owned a farm out there. He had acres of corn, wheat, potatoes, etc., but corn was his main crop, so he had a huge cornfield. It was around 2 a.m., and his grandfather couldn't sleep, so he went outside to get some fresh air. While outside, he noticed something that looked like a child walking around in the cornfield. So Bob ran back inside and grabbed his double-barrel shotgun and woke the farmhand for backup. They combed through the cornfield in an attempt to find whatever was running around out there. After a while, they still couldn't find anything, so Bob told the farmhand to go back inside the house while he stayed on the porch to watch his cornfield. Then, as he looks at the gravel road between his yard and the fence line that led to the cornfield, standing on the road was a little girl around 6 years old or so, and she was wearing a white dress that made her look like she had just gotten out of church. Bob thought that his mind must have been playing tricks on him, so he tried to lay down on the couch to rest, but also stay somewhat alert. However, not even a minute after he laid down, he heard a knock on the screen door. He walked up to the door and slightly cracked the main door open. He saw the little girl and asked, "May I help you?" The little girl said, "Mister, I'm lost, and I don't know where my parents are. Can I come in the house and use your telephone?" Bob felt uneasy, and told her that he could get her a glass of water and that he can call her parents for her if she gave him the number, but he didn't feel comfortable allowing her in his home. He felt something off about the little girl. However, the little girl insisted to be the one to call and talk to them. And Bob said, "Young lady, it's 2 a.m, and I don't feel right letting a stranger into the house, little girl or not." The little girl started to get agitated and said, "I'm not leaving until you let me in to use your phone." Startled, Bob told the little girl that he was going to call the police to come pick her up so that they could keep her safe and find her parents. He closed the door to go and call the police, and he heard someone punch the door like a grown man. He walked back and cracked the door open again, but when he looked, he realized that it was still the little girl, and that she was the one who had punched the door. But when he looked at her this time, she didn't have any eyes. Instead, she had pitch black orbs instead of eyes, and she said in a deep voice, "Let me in." Bob grabbed his shotgun and pointed it at the little girl and told her no and to go away. After this, the little girl looked right into the barrel and then back up at Bob, smiled smugly at him, and giggled before she ran back into the cornfield and disappeared. Believe it or not, my story is true. My name is Brandy, I am 56, and I live in Washington. All these years my kids wanted me to write down events that happened to myself and my loved ones. Quite a few members of my family have recently passed away, leaving so many untold stories that I didn't want these experiences to die with me. So for my children, here it goes. A lot of messed up and supernatural things have happened to us in our lifetime, most with witnesses. This is one of them. About 27 years ago, while house hunting for a rental, I met the former renter of this run-down but livable house. She warned me not to live in this house because I have small children. And not only was it run down, it was very haunted, and never, she was stern, never let a man live here with you because he will be taken over by the evil that resides within. Now, I'm thinking she's either crazy or she was just mad at the landlord for something. We needed a home incredibly desperately. I was also thinking that I had lived through worse, and houses could always be cleansed, so I blew it off. I ended up renting the house, but I soon realized that I should have heeded her warning. The house was musty and old, made of wood. The walls, the ceilings, and the floors were all wood. Even the bedroom doors blended in with the walls, but the bedrooms were painted on the other side. There were French doors all along the front of the house going into an enclosed but open-viewed screen porch with a front door. The main living space was long and open. The living and dining area were stretched into one long room, and it was always cold despite having the heater on and it being in the desert. It was located in the high desert of California on the corner of an acre lot of barren desert, and across the street there was a popular grocery store and a few small shops too far away for anyone to hear us. It served as a town hall back in the day, and I think a turkey ranch before that. It was 6 a.m., and we had planned a 3-day trip to the happiest place in the world, Disneyland. My kids, Michael, age 1, Penny, age 4, and Jenny, age 3, were all sleeping on my bed in our bedroom at the other end of the house so I could pack in peace for the trip in the dining room and not wake them. I could see the bedroom door, though, and it was closed. I was standing up folding clothes at the table. My boyfriend's mother, Opal, was sitting across from me when we heard the bedroom door creak open slightly. We both looked up, and it was my daughter Jenny in her little pink and white flowered onesie. I said, "Now you know it's too early, go back to bed." And she replied, "Me up now, Mommy," in her little sweet voice. It made us both chuckle, and I told Opal that I thought she was just excited. I told her no, that we weren't going right now, so please go back to bed. She stomped her foot, which we could feel vibrate through the floorboards. Opal then told me that I had better go and put her back, and I agreed. As I was making that long walk toward her, I was keeping eye contact, and as I was walking, I was telling her, "No, baby," and once again she stomps her foot, smiles, and says louder, "Me up," with the sweetest little smile, and she tilted her head. Opal even muttered, "Aw." It didn't dawn on me at the time how perfect that her little pigtails were. At this point, I'm extending my hands toward her. I get about 6 inches from touching her, and all of a sudden she turned black and disappeared, almost like sand falling to the ground, followed by the door quickly closing behind her. Opal said, "What the hell?" in surprise. Shocked, I stood there with my hands still extended, and then the fear ran through my body like hot and cold needles. My kids were all sleeping behind that door. I grabbed the handle and swung open the door, fearing the worst, only to find my little Jenny fast asleep with her sister's leg over her. Whatever we had seen, it couldn't have been her. Although unsettling, Opal and I didn't talk about what had happened, and later that morning we all piled into the car and went on our trip. We had a great time, but when we came home we were met with all of the lights on and old music playing loudly coming from inside. People were standing around in my living room. 2 separate groups, like 2 different periods of time. I turned to my boyfriend and asked how those people got in and if he left the door unlocked. He told me, "No, why the hell would I do that? You saw me lock it." We all got out of the car and cautiously approached the front door. As I got closer, I could see a couch not where our couch was, with a man in a white tank top sitting there. He was dirty, and he was looking at this boy standing in the corner with such hatred. You could tell the boy was abused by the way that he was standing there with his head down. That's when he looked up at me, and it pierces my soul even now just to think about him. The kids were scared, and the dog was growling. I grabbed the doorknob to put my key in. Just then the music stopped, and the lights went out. We opened the door, and nothing had been moved, and no one was there. I couldn't get the image of that sad-looking little boy out of my mind, and it was a while before I saw him again. It was a nice day. My boyfriend and his mother were still at a doctor's appointment, and the kids and I were out grocery shopping, having a good time. I usually kept the living room light on when I knew that we were going to get home after dark. I didn't realize we would be gone that long, and it was just starting to be dusk. I pulled into the gate, and I think the kids were a little too rambunctious, too much spare change, quarter machine candy, I guess. I sat for a moment, planning my attack with getting all these groceries, a sleeping baby, and the two girls up the steps and into the house, when I noticed movement in the living room. No one was home. I could hardly even see anything in there because the light wasn't on. I started to get out when the girls jumped out of the car and started running for the steps. I yelled for them to stop and ran over to them. We could hear noises like a child running around, and my eldest daughter to this day says that she saw a little boy and describes him to a T, but at that moment I thought that it might be an intruder or something like that. 3 steps went up to a landing, a locked front door opening into a windowed screened-in porch, and then the 3 French doors. I told the kids to go to the car, but they were too scared to leave my side. Both of them were clutching the back of my shirt. I armed myself with a huge stick by the landing and forged on. I burst through the front door to the porch, and he was there, his face in his 2 hands cupped against the glass, as if he was peering out, and then he vanished. It was the boy that I had seen standing in the corner before. We went inside and I searched every room with my obviously frightened children practically glued to my side. There was no one there. Was my mind playing tricks on me, and I was projecting my fear onto the girls? I turned on all the lights and ran out to get my sleeping baby and the rest of the groceries out of the car when I stopped in my tracks. There on the glass were 2 crescent moon handprints, and it was fogged up where his nose was. It stayed there for at least 20 minutes. Just to add my own thoughts here, I don't feel that we always need words to communicate with spirits or for them to get a message to us. They are not bound by flesh. It is important that you have an open mind and always keep your will strong. At night, you could look out the French doors at the stores across the street and see the vast desert behind them. The property was pitch black, so you saw the reflection of yourself and whatever was behind you. That night, everyone was asleep. It was nearly Christmas, so I was admiring the lights decorating the storefronts when I felt one of my children through the floorboards skip up next to me, and then I heard a faint giggle. I felt a tug on my shirt, so I turned my gaze to the reflection, extending my arm over as if to caress the back of his head and pull him in next to me. It didn't occur to me that this was not my child. He came in under my arm and stood there looking up at me, and all I could feel was love and sorrow. I turned to look at him, but he was gone. So I looked back at his reflection, and it was gone as well. He was about 7 or 8 years old. He had what looked like black and white Converse on, and was wearing old jeans with rolled-up cuffs. I could see the edge of a white t-shirt under a light gray sweatshirt, and his hair was sandy blonde and wisped to the side with the sweetest smile. In that moment, I felt everything that he was feeling, and I cried. I saw the images of abuse flash through my head. I don't want to elaborate on that, and he made me feel that the man was not his father, and that he loved the comfort of our presence. There were so many emotions. I went to bed and held my kids tight. I was so full of questions, like what happened to his mom? How did he die? I looked for records and was told that back in the day there were not many records kept out there in the desert. A person could live and die, and no one would know unless it was specifically reported. I felt whatever else was in the house was evil, and we found out just how evil it was the longer that we lived there. I feel I should describe the bedroom so that you can get a feel of the surroundings. On one side of the room there was my full-size bed against the wall, and a single bed next to me against the other wall, separated by a small nightstand with a lamp where my 2 little girls slept. The door to the living room was next to their bed, and at our feet was the hall door and closet. Many nights, we would see the light beneath the door get blocked out, as if someone were walking up to my room just standing there, and then they would fade away. At first we thought it was just Opal going to the bathroom, since it was right next to our room, but we found out later that it wasn't her, because she was frail and had to use a potty chair in her room. The dog would sometimes growl and scratch, but when we opened the door to the hall, no one was ever there. Almost every morning at 6 a.m., we could hear the lid to the toilet slam up and the toilet flush, but when we ran in there, the lid was down and the water was still. A phone would start ringing in my room despite us not even having one, and we would hear old music coming from the walls from time to time. At first, we thought that it was coming from the pipes of our neighbor or something like that, but we didn't have any neighbors because the lady had already moved out, and that house was completely empty. So many things happened there, but this night in particular caused me to never let my girls sleep in their own bed alone. The girls were so happy that day. They had both received a package from my mom full of princess stuff. Toys, cups, and bowls, 2 beach towels, and 2 nightgowns embossed with their favorite princess images. The nightgowns were short and silky, and after their bath they begged to wear them to bed, so I happily complied. It was quiet in the house that night. Opal was with family along with my boyfriend, and I don't remember where the dog was, but he wasn't present anyway. I tucked them in, oldest by the wall and youngest closest to me on the outside. I wasn't ready for sleep, so I put a scarf over the lamp to dim the light, so that I could still read. Now I was sitting on my bed next to them, and as I was reading, the covers slightly came down off of the girls. I didn't really think anything of it, because my oldest daughter was notorious for kicking off the blankets, so I tucked them both in and continued reading. It happened again, and once again I covered them back up. At this point I was starting to feel uneasy, and the hairs on my arms were beginning to raise. Never a good sign. I looked at my oldest daughter and noticed that she hadn't moved. So how was this happening? I sat back down on my bed and pretended to read while intently staring at the covers over the book pages, feeling my heart pound through my chest. Moments passed, and I felt myself trembling, trying to hold the book steady, and then it happened. I saw the covers start to move, but the girls were still. I was confused. I didn't understand what was going on. The covers were then pulled down with force, so I leapt up and grabbed the covers from the end of the bed, pulling them up. At this point I was standing next to them, and my voice quivered as I yelled at whatever was in the room to stay away from my girls. I still don't know who I was yelling at. I sat on the bed next to them, gripping the covers tight, when they were jerked from my hands down to the foot of the bed, exposing my girls' legs. My youngest daughter's nightgown started to rise up to the top of her thigh. She started to scream and grabbed at her leg as if she were feeling pain, waking her sister. I threw my body over both girls and screamed at whatever it was to get out and leave us alone repeatedly. I tried my best to calm the girls down and protect them. We stayed huddled together all night. This was the last time they slept alone in that house. I was able to get a bigger bed, and we all slept together from that point forward. At this point, I'm sure you're wondering, why didn't we just leave? Believe me, I wanted to, but I felt trapped. Not just by the house, but also by my boyfriend. Let me start by saying that Bill was not the nicest man. Oh yeah, from the outside he was great. He had a charming voice, and he made people laugh. Nobody thought that he was capable of doing the things that he did. They didn't know him like I did. I feel he tricked me when we first got together. I was young and impressionable. He knew I had low self-esteem, so he made me feel like I wasn't good enough for anyone else and was lucky to have him. We had children together. I knew what he was capable of, and let's just say that I didn't want to lose anyone I loved, so that's why I didn't leave him. But this was different. This was not him. This was an entirely new level of evil. I started noticing a shift in him the longer that we lived in that house. We stopped going out as a family, and he stopped working. He put bars on the windows, and one-way locks on all the doors with only one key. Not even his mother cared. She would go into her bedroom and shut the door so that she didn't have to hear me scream, or our children cry when he sometimes hit me. And like always, he made me feel like it was my fault. Living there changed him, though. The things he started to do were out of his character, and that made me more uncomfortable. He started watching me from dark rooms and behind cracks in the doors. When I asked him why he was doing this, he got mad and made me feel like I was crazy. When we were alone together in that house, it was even more intense. One such night the kids were at my mother's, and we had just finished dinner. We were sitting together on the couch watching TV, and I was mending a sock. It had been a pretty good day. I noticed a change in the atmosphere, and for some reason he seemed to have gotten quiet. I was just about to ask him if he wanted me to change the channel, when a small flash of light hit my right eye. It wasn't until shortly after trying to find the source that I realized. He was staring at me the whole time through a little piece of broken mirror in his right hand, hidden by the throw cover. My God, those eyes weren't his. I know him. This was not my person sitting next to me, and I was frightened to the core. He didn't even realize that I saw this, so I sprung up. His mom just had a phone installed, so I'm trying to call my mother and check on the kids. He jumped and hid the mirror in the couch cushions and started trying to reason with me as to why I should come back and sit down next to him and not make that phone call. I noticed that while he was talking, he wasn't even looking at me. He was looking behind my head, almost as if he were looking through me. I glanced at my reflection in the glass door, but nothing was behind me. I grabbed the phone and called my mother, assuring him that I was only going to be a minute. We stayed on the phone until he fell asleep, and quite a bit longer. My mother knew what was going on, but she felt helpless, as I did at that time. He got up, grumbling something as he walked into the bedroom to go to sleep on the bed, so after we hung up, I stayed awake with the blanket on the couch covering everything but my eyes while listening to him breathe until dawn, when I finally fell asleep. There was another time at around 4 p.m. We needed some groceries for dinner, so I got the girls ready and left my baby boy asleep in his playpen in the living room. Opal was napping at the dining room table, and my Bill was sitting on the edge of our bed in the bedroom. I called out to him that I was leaving, and to keep an ear out for the baby, but he didn't respond, so I repeated myself and I heard him mutter, "Yeah, sure." So we left. The store didn't have something his mother wanted, so I had to go to 2 stores. It had just gotten dark as we pulled up, and I could hear the baby crying. I rushed in, and Bill's mother was still sitting at the table. I picked up my son, and he was soaking wet, and it looked like he had been crying for a while. I was changing his diaper, trying to calm him down, and the whole time Opal was getting mad at me for leaving her alone with the baby. I was furious, and I told her, "I didn't. I left him with your son." She looked surprised. She didn't even know that he was home. What the hell? Where was he? I put my son down and told the girls to go play. Something wasn't right. I didn't think he was still in the bedroom because the lights were off, but someone was in there. It was abnormally dark. I slowly went up to the door and walked in. There was a dim light coming in through a crack in the blinds, and I saw his silhouette still sitting on the bed. He hadn't moved. His feet were on the floor, and he was slightly hunched forward with his elbows resting on his legs, cupping his hands together. The room smelled stuffy, and the air was thick. I called out his name, but he didn't reply. Once again I called out his name, adding, "You're scaring me." I moved closer, saying, "Why are you not answering me?" I saw that he was sweating and that it was glistening in the light and dripping from his head to his hands and then his hands to the floor. I could hear it as it dripped. I was shaking while I slowly made my way around him to the lamp, and I heard a growl that almost sounded like it was coming up from the floorboards. I turned the lamp on. His shirt was soaking wet. There was a pool of sweat at his feet, and his eyes were darker than I've ever seen them. His stare was fixated downward. I was afraid to get near him, but I felt like he needed my help. I started to shake him while calling out his name. He was cold to the touch. I crouched down in front of him between his legs, but honestly, all I wanted to do was run out of that room. I took his face in my shaking hands and said, "Please, Bill." Just like that, he snapped out of it. He grabbed both of my wrists and hurled me onto the bed behind him. He said in a loud voice, "What are you doing, you freak?" Then he got up and went to the bathroom. I heard him turn on the shower as I laid there curled up, not knowing what had just happened. I soon composed myself and went out to bring in the groceries and make dinner. Later he joined us as if nothing had ever happened, but I still felt uneasy. The night went on, and he was his old self, goofing off with the kids and watching cartoons. I went into the kitchen and started washing dishes with my back to the hall. I heard him in the living room with the kids. I swear, I heard him. The next thing I knew, he was behind me, and he aggressively grabbed my waist and put his mouth on me. I could feel his teeth on my neck. I jumped. He startled me. Then he looked at me like he wanted me dead and said, "You disgust me," and left the house. I don't know where he went. I didn't ask. All I know is that he was gone. He came back later that next morning, dirty, and saying something about him getting lost in the desert. I remember him telling me once that I could scream out there and no one would hear me. We eventually got out of that house after living through horror, not knowing from day to day what was going to happen next, and who was safe from that evil. Later, after his mother had moved into her daughter's house, she passed away. I felt bad because I wasn't even sad about it. I found a way to leave Bill. I made an excuse that I needed to pick up a check from the welfare department, and that I had to bring the kids with me. After I got there, I told them that I was being abused, and they helped me find a safe place to go. After I didn't return that day, a detective from the sheriff's department came and asked me questions about him, because apparently he stole a child and took her to that empty house. Thank God he was caught before he could do anything to her. I never let him hurt my children, but sadly, they remember him hurting me. For years after that, I would have nightmares of him appearing at the foot of my bed, clawing his way up my legs, and closing the space between our faces with his cold breath on my lips, and those eyes. I would wake up gasping for air. About 9 years ago, I looked up his name and found him on a website exposing predators. I still shiver when I see small mirrors or broken glass. A few years after we moved out, I ran into the former renter, so I asked her if she knew anything about a little boy ever living there, or did someone die there, and she said, now this is not fact. She said that she heard, I don't know where though, that there was a boy and his mother disappeared, leaving him with his stepdad, who is horribly abusive. Later, the boy was found stuffed in a hole on the property, dead, and they found the stepfather's dried and decayed body on the couch in the living room. he had committed suicide. Like I said, I don't know if that's true, but it seemed pretty damn close to how I felt. I wish even now that I could have helped that sweet little boy move on. We couldn't even drive down that street for years after that, and we all cried with relief many years later when we found out that the house had been demolished to the ground and that a housing tract was being built over the land. I still wonder if those people living there are plagued by the same evil that plagued us. This is a 100% true story that happened to me when I was about 12. I lived in a really small town in central Wisconsin with my family. My mom had gotten divorced when I was 8, but it was her and her boyfriend and all my siblings in the house, minus the 3 oldest. I had finally gotten my own room since the 3 oldest moved out, and was so excited, but for the first couple months I didn't sleep in there because I was too scared, so I would sleep with my sister in her room. As we were getting ready to move out of that house, I finally worked up the courage to sleep in my room by myself. My bed was positioned so that when I laid down on my back, I was facing the door. This night in particular, I had kept the bedroom door open because it was a really warm summer night. I remember waking up sometime in the night. I have no idea what time it was, nor do I think I would remember even if I had looked. Anyway, when I woke up, I turned over onto my back and happened to glance outside my door. When I did, I saw this black silhouette of a man who I thought looked just like Abraham Lincoln, tall, thin, with what looked like a top hat and a beard. He was standing right outside my door next to the railing that led to the stairs. I remember staring for a moment, but getting freaked out and covering my head with the blanket and going back to sleep. Fast forward about a year to where we were moved into our new house, a small mobile home in the middle of nowhere, and I had a dream. In the dream, I was back in the old house, my childhood home. I remember all I could think was, I'm home. It felt so calm, so familiar. Everything was exactly how I remembered it, down to my messy room. In my dream, I went exploring through the house, reminiscing. I was so glad to be back, but then I woke up. It was such a nice dream, but I eventually forgot about it. And that was when I had my second dream. It was roughly a month or so later. I was back in my old home, but something was off. As I was walking through, I realized that things were missing. The china cabinet in the dining room was gone, and so was the stereo we had in the living room, and so on. Just little things. It didn't feel as familiar or as happy as the last dream that I had had, but when I woke up yet again, and just like the last time, I eventually forgot about it. Fast forward again to probably 2 or 3 months later, and I had another dream. I was back in my childhood home, surprise, surprise, and again things were missing and the whole energy just felt off. I remember feeling very uneasy and uncomfortable there, but I couldn't leave. And then I saw it again. The Abraham Lincoln-looking shadow that I had seen a year before. He was just wandering the halls upstairs. I got really freaked out and tried to leave, but then I woke up again. And again, I forgot about the dream not too long after. Finally, just a few short months later when I was staying at my grandparents' house, I had what would be the last dream. I was back in my old home again, and this time, everything was gone. The whole house was empty. It probably looked like that because that was how it looked the last time I saw it, right before we officially left. But anyway, I was walking through the house feeling so creeped out, and again like last time, just wanting to leave. It no longer felt like home. Then there was this man or figure. It didn't look like the shadow that I had seen before, but I couldn't make out any features either. He asked me if I was okay, and I said no, and that I wanted to leave. Then he asked, "Would you like to leave with me?" and held out his hand. I got such a bad feeling from him that I said no. He started promising me that if I went with him, that I could go back to my childhood home, back to what was so familiar and happy to me. But I refused, and then I woke up. After that, I told my sister everything. From the shadow man that I saw first, to all the dreams that I had. At first, we thought that maybe I was having some sort of psychic visions, but a few years later, I found out the truth. I found out that the silhouette that I saw was a shadow person after I watched a video by Haley Reese on what they are. Then a couple more years later, after meeting my boyfriend, whose whole family is very into the supernatural, I found out what the whole thing actually meant. He explained to me that demons often come to you in dreams to attempt to possess you. They'll start by creating a situation that's familiar and comforting. But after a dream or two, they start adding or taking things away, slowly, so as not to make it obvious. You start to become uncomfortable and threatened and scared, until one time they're the only thing that makes you feel safe. And that's when they have you. They'll promise you everything good you could ever want, and as soon as you say yes, you're saying yes to them taking over your body. My boyfriend explained that I was very smart for saying no, and for telling my sister. Because by telling my sister, I basically broke the demon's hold. That's apparently why back in the old days, people would tell their dreams to someone. Because it basically breaks the hold of whatever demon or spirit may be trying to possess you. I was a jail nurse for about 3 years in a correctional facility that housed approximately 1,300 inmates. Loved the job, would have stayed longer, but administration sucked. Anyhow, that's another story. I worked night shift, and I've had some really creepy things happen that just could not be rationally explained. I worked both booking and infirmary, but the majority of the incidents occurred in the infirmary. Okay, so I was there maybe a month. Not a new nurse, but new to corrections. Anyone who has spent any time in a jail will tell you that when those heavy doors slam shut, it is a very distinctive, definitive, loud noise. To get into the infirmary, you have to have a key or be buzzed in by a central control. So I'm sitting at my desk, and I hear the metal door outside my office click, like someone from Central has unlocked it, and it opens about halfway, and then just slammed shut. Now in my office, there is a huge glass window so that the nursing staff can see any inmates that are about to enter. When the door slammed, I thought it was just one of the officers messing around, and I jumped up and went to the window. But no one was there. I called Central, and the officer that answered sounded like I just woke him from a sound sleep, and I said, "Ha ha, very funny." He had no idea what I was talking about. And I knew this officer, and I was surprised that he would go along with any type of prank, because frankly, he was kind of a jerk-off with absolutely no sense of humor. After that, I just thought it was some mechanical glitch. I sat down and everything just changed. It felt colder, and I sensed that I was being watched. I was just all around uncomfortable. I took my stethoscope from around my neck and put it on the desk and left my office to go into the medical department. I stayed in medical for a few talking to the staff in there, and then went back to my office. When I walked in, I went to grab my stethoscope off the desk to check an inmate, and it wasn't there. I looked on the desk, on the side, underneath. It just wasn't there. I should mention that when I left my office, I did lock the door as per protocol, and I'm the only one on the shift with the key. Now I think I'm going crazy, so I start looking everywhere, and I cannot find it. In my office there is a large closet that holds all supplies that is also locked, with the key being on the set of keys that I carry. Anyhow, later in the shift, I needed to go into the closet and get something. I really don't remember what. And sitting in the middle of the floor is my stethoscope. I picked it up, and the heavy metal door outside my office clicks again, opens halfway, and slams shut. I locked the closet, locked my office, and went out for a smoke. I was scared shitless, but I had responsibilities and patients to look after. So I go back in, and I swear the whole atmosphere was lighter. It was warmer, and I felt way more comfortable. When my shift was over, the central officers rewound the tapes for me, and I saw the doors just open and slam shut with not a single person near them or in the hallway. I wish I could say that that was the last time it happened, or that I got more comfortable with it. I did not, because each time it happened it seems that the doors slammed harder, and that uncomfortable feeling lasted longer and longer, almost as if I were being stalked. Things that went missing were found in different parts in the jail. My pen case in the women's wing. My med sheets in solitary central control room. My portable blood pressure cuff in the kitchen. And each and every time something of mine would show up in another part of the jail, the officers and I would look at the tapes and see no one. Remember, I said I felt like I was being stalked. Well, that's because all these things happened to me, but no other nurse who worked nights. Not one other nurse who worked on my days off had anything happen either. No doors slam, click open, shut, no stuff moving. It was just me. Every officer and every one of the medical staff who worked there well before I got there swore up and down that this kind of incident never, ever had occurred before. It got to the point for me that I started just not staying in my office. I would just get all the stuff that I needed for my shift and sit at the officer's desk. I did that until I left there and got another job. I haven't had anything like that happen ever again. This story took place when I was a kid. My dad has been a pool man for many years. One of his oldest customers decided to purchase a ranch. I don't exactly remember where. He asked my dad if he could come and fix their pool, which was disastrously maintained before he bought it. He gave my dad permission to bring us along, and told us that we were welcome to stay a few days to enjoy the ranch. We drove there, and I had been in charge of reading the MapQuest instructions because I never seemed to be able to sleep during car trips. We drove back home a few days later, after my dad was finally able to save the pool. The drive home was very long. For endless stretches, the view was mostly desert, farms, and the occasional small suburban town. Unlike me, my mom and brothers were knocked out almost immediately. So most of the trip, it was just my dad and I talking or listening to music. I'm also a very avid reader, so I had a book on my lap beside the maps. I remember the ride had been quiet for a while, because I had been reading. I had to stop because it was getting dark, and my dad would only let me turn on the dome lights to read the maps. No radio service, and the Game Boy batteries had all died. All I had left to do was stare out the window. All of a sudden, I spotted a very tall shadow on a roof. I realized that there was a man who seemed to be wearing a hat, bowler or top hat, dancing and jumping from rooftop to rooftop of this suburban lot. It was kind of like the scene from Singing in the Rain, which, at that point, I had not yet seen myself. It took a second for me to realize that this was not a normal thing to observe. The houses were separated in a way where a normal person couldn't possibly have jumped from roof to roof the way that that thing was. What scared me the most is how at the last house before a field he seemed to turn around and sense me. He bowed and tipped his hat. Even though I couldn't see it, I could also sense that he was smiling. All I felt was dread. I turned to my dad to see if he had also seen it, but he had of course been paying attention to the road. When I looked back, I couldn't see the houses anymore. They were way behind us. I never saw a face or any details. He was just a silhouette on the roofs. I remember the feeling of being afraid that it would follow us. That it could, if it wanted to. I never saw something like that on our many road trips ever again. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it, but it felt so real. The memory is so vivid as well, which always comes back when I'm watching old musicals because the dancing reminds me of the way that he moved. This happened around the end of November of last year, while I was at a late-night party at a mutual friend's house. The night started off fine, with us having a few drinks and talking about the classes that we would be taking next semester. This pretty much went on till around 2 a.m., and by this time I wanted to go home since the party was already dying down and most of my friends had already left and I was practically there alone. Instead of wasting money on an Uber, I decided to walk home since my neighborhood was only a few blocks away, but it was still a decent walk. However, there was a shortcut. There was a secluded dirt road in the neighborhood which led to a stretch of walkway with an irrigation canal for crops, and it happened to lead straight to the backyard of my house. I began making my way to the lonely dirt road, and I started to second-guess my decisions since that stretch of walkway can be pretty shady, especially at night since a few drug dealers and junkies like to hang out there. I mustered up the little courage I had, feeling confident that I'd be able to handle myself if anything ever hit the fan, so I proceeded to walk on the desolate road. The night sky was well lit. The moon illuminated my surroundings enough for me to see my environment pretty clearly. The walk was actually pleasant. The only thing that made it tough to navigate was the overgrown, thorny weeds and mesquite branches that kept scraping against the exposed parts of my skin. As I continued to walk through the brush, I finally got to the clearing that led to the bridge, and to my relief, there didn't seem to be anyone in sight. As I began to cross the bridge, I then picked up a faint scent of lavender mixed with something rancid, like the smell of a good cheese or days-old roadkill. I couldn't even tell where it was coming from, but as soon as I made it to the other side of the bridge, the environment seemed to suddenly shift. It's hard to describe, but there was this heavy pressure that washed over me, like being submerged underwater, coupled with this gut feeling telling me that something about the environment was just off. I pushed the feeling off as a random anxiety attack, since I do get them sometimes, but deep down I knew this was different. To calm my nerves, I stopped walking and did slow breathing and began to count to 10 while clenching and releasing my fist to try and shake off this bad vibe, or whatever it was. When I finished my little ritual, I felt a little better and more at ease. I started to walk in the direction of my house until I heard this odd grunting sound come from behind me. I turned around, and I saw a woman with short black hair and a silky white gown crouched down with her back turned away from me. She was just a few feet away, and it was strange because when I crossed the bridge, I didn't see anyone around the area. Did I pass by her without even realizing it? I thought to myself. She was hunched over, after all, and I do tend to get caught up in my own little world. At this point, the faint smell from earlier was just overbearing, so much so that it started seeping into my sense of taste. I covered my mouth with the bottom of my t-shirt, trying to shield myself from it, while I yelled out the muffled words, "Hello, ma'am? Do you need any help?" She paid no mind to me as she continued to make that weird grunting sound, and I was creeped out at this point, so I walked away a couple steps and turned to get a better look at her. She then decided to stand up, still with her back turned to me, and muttered the word muerte, which means death in Spanish. Confused, trying to understand what the strange woman had said to me, she then slowly turned to meet my gaze, and all the blood in my body pooled in my gut when I saw her face. It was extremely long, too long for a normal human body to be supporting it. The head of this thing almost resembled that of a horse or a donkey's head, and the eyes. I'll never forget the eyes, as much as I've tried to. They were gaping pits of blackness surrounded by a sea of red. Complete silence fell over the area as I was petrified by what I was witnessing. My brain, a scrambling mess, was trying to make sense of the unnatural abomination that was before me. The creature then decided to let out what I can only describe as a high-pitched scream, like a cross between a pig squealing and a woman's wailing. My fight-or-flight reflex then kicked in, and I started sprinting to my house. I didn't even bother trying to unlock the gate to my fence. I jumped over it with ease. My grandmother saw when I came barging into the house. The words wouldn't even leave my mouth to tell her what I had seen, as the fatigue quickly kicked in after the adrenaline wore off. But afterwards, I described everything to her. With a look of urgency, she then decided to perform a cleansing ritual. The ritual involved rubbing an egg all across my body in 3 circular motions while chanting a special prayer. She then cracked the egg that she was using into a clear glass cup that was half filled with water, and when she did, the egg came out with streams of blood, and the yolk that came out of the egg looked similar to a human pupil, which is a very bad omen for the person who is being cleansed. After seeing this, she laid her hands on my forehead and chanted another prayer for about a minute, and threw the raw yolk out of our house and into the driveway. She didn't bother to say anything to me until the following morning, when she reluctantly told me that what I encountered was an entity that specifically preys on men, kind of like a succubus, and told me that this thing had a very dark and malicious intent, and that I was lucky to have gotten away from it. To this day, I haven't set foot on that stretch of road again. This is the story of the time I saw an apparition that looked as if it crept right off the silver screen. This encounter happened in the late summer, early fall of 2007. I was in the 4th grade and my family had just moved to the absolute boonies of Mississippi. I was born in Mississippi and still had a lot of family down there, but my father had been stationed in another state for the previous several years. Military. So I guess you could say we were moving back home. My parents were in the market to buy a house, but until they found one, we would be staying with my great-aunt and her family. My aunt had a beautiful but slightly run-down 100-and-something-year-old home in the woods on the outskirts of an abominably small town. In order to get to her home, you had to drive down a 1-lane dirt road through the woods. On this particular afternoon, my sisters and my cousin, who was about our age, were playing tag in the front yard of my aunt's home. Now, you need to know a little bit about the layout of this yard. The yard was longer than it was wide. Picture a rectangle with the house on one end and the dirt roadway at the other end of it. If you're looking at the house from the road, the right side of the yard is bordered by muddy soil, thick trees, and bamboo that creates a sort of natural border to the property. On the other side of the yard is a length of tropical leafy bushes about waist high that run from the front of the porch almost down to the road separating the yard from the driveway, just on the other side of the plants. Near the road in the middle of the yard was a ginormous old oak tree dripping with Spanish moss. Now back to the game. This particular round of tag, I was it. My siblings and cousin were running around the yard and the house, trying to hide behind various things. As I was scanning the yard, I noticed the figure of a girl with long, straight brown hair, peeping her head out from behind the big oak tree. She was wearing a dress that fell below her knees, which was very different from what the rest of us kids were wearing, namely cut-off jean shorts and stained t-shirts. I thought it was odd to see someone there, since I could have sworn that I saw all of the girls run in the opposite direction toward the house, but I figured I would go and check it out anyway. As I made it to the tree, I looked behind the trunk, and there was no one there. I was beyond confused at this point. My 10-year-old brain didn't immediately jump to ghost. It was more along the lines of, who the heck was that? The tree was in the center of the yard, with no other trees or shrubbery within 20 or so yards, so if the girl would have run up from behind the tree, I should have seen her. By that point, I started scanning the yard, and my eyes happened to fall to those tropical bushes that bordered the driveway. Crouching down near the bushes was the same figure of the girl. I remember her squatting near the leaves and peering in my direction when I noticed that she had no face. She was completely absent of any facial features, eyes, lips, and nose. Her face was just a smooth expanse of flesh-colored skin. It looked like something straight out of Silent Hill. I must have looked away, and then she was gone. I have never seen this apparition since. Now, I honest to goodness recall this encounter just as I have described above, but it was also 14 years ago. It's quite possible that my memory has faltered in some aspects, or is exaggerated in others, but this is how I recall it. Either way, it was terrifying. When I was like 13, my mom and her boyfriend had to go to the hospital, and no one would be able to get my brother to the bus stop the next morning because they had to stay overnight. So, I got to miss school the next day to take my brother. After I made sure my brother got on the bus, I went home and cleaned and did random stuff, like a 13-year-old would do. It was around 11:45 when there was a knock on my door. Thinking it was the mailman or a neighbor or something, I opened the door and said hello. There was this kid. He couldn't have been much older than me at the time, but he had bangs that were covering his eyes, which I found weird because it was like 107 degrees out. So this kid was super still. Like, I thought that one of my friends put a mannequin there and ran away or something. But then it spoke. It sounded like a robot or something. It was like it was programmed to say this. My mother said to ask someone for a phone in fear that I get lost. Do you have a phone? At this point, I was crapping my pants because 1, I'm a 13-year-old girl, and this older boy was dressed like a burglar and at my door with half his face covered. 2, for some reason, I just couldn't look away. I felt like if I moved or said anything other than yes, that I would explode. And 3, I saw 2 other boys around the same age standing in my driveway dressed exactly the same way as the one in front of me. Baggy jeans, dark hoodie, and scruffed up Vans. I began to stutter and shake my head. It was the only thing I could do. I finally got out a no and then started to close my door, but he put his foot in the way. Then the 2 others started walking up, and I was going, hell no. I grabbed the bat by the door and threatened him. If you don't leave right now, I'll kick your ass and then call the cops. I shouted loud enough so that at least one of my neighbors could hear, I hoped. Now, I was this short girl with SpongeBob pajama pants on. I was in no way intimidating. Then he moved his foot and stepped back into the middle of the other 2 perfectly. Then the far right one said in the exact same tone of voice as the first, I'm sorry to bother you. I'll just come again later and ask. Internally, I was planning my funeral. Just as I was about to close the door, the first one smiled and looked up. And that was when I saw that they had black eyes. Then the other 2 looked up, and they were the same. I was like, nope, and slammed the door shut, then called my neighbor, who was this big-ass 20-something-year-old dude. He ran over and looked for them all around my house, but he said they were gone. When I told my mom all of this, she didn't believe me and said I was lying. Said me, the girl with absolutely no social life, who was afraid of her own shadow, was lying. I work in a hospital as a nurse. I was on a row of nights, which I dread. I ended up having 5 patients, 2 of which were under care for cancer. There are 2 events in here from 2 separate nights. 1. The night started normally as I assessed and passed meds to the patients and did my charting and other night duties, stocking and other stuff. Just around 11 p.m., one of my palliative patients started ringing, complaining that there was a kid running into the room laughing and playing when they should be in bed. I checked the room to make sure that there was no one in there and reassured him that there were no children in the hospital area where we were. I made him comfortable and left the room. He rang again. I went back to the room to see what he rang for. Agitated, he said that he was just looking to rest comfortably and that people should keep their children under control and not let them jump on his bed playing and laughing. This time, I got the chills, but again, I reassured him that there were no children since it wasn't the pediatric ward. I told him that I would bring him a sleeping pill to help him fall asleep, but that I would be a few minutes. I start walking back toward the desk and medication room to grab the pill. A bell rang. I turned around and saw that the indicator above his door was flashing. Slightly annoyed, I walked back to his room. He was agitated in his bed again, and I asked him what was wrong. He again complained about the kid. He said he was just in there again. I leaned over the bed and calmly explained, "There are no children in this hospital. Look, you need to get some rest." He replied loudly, "He is standing right behind you." I stood up instantly and slowly turned around. Creeped out, I turned to face the patient, and before I could speak, he says, "He ran into the closet," referring to the lockers where patients can store items. I slowly opened the locker and saw that his jacket was swinging, but no one was in there. I turned and told him that there was no one. I rushed into the med room to give him that sleeping pill. 2. This will be a short one. I came out of one of my patients' rooms and was sanitizing my hands, but facing the wall. As I was rubbing my hands together, I noticed the shadow of someone walk out of the room next door, and then walk into the room across from it, as I turned to see. I went into the room where I had seen it go. I asked the patient, who wasn't one of mine, if anyone had come in there. She replied no, but with a shaky voice. I checked the room to make sure that there was indeed no one. I left that room and went into the room where it had came from. I looked around, but again, no one was in there. I checked the patient, who again was not assigned to me, and found that he had died. He was palliative. I walked out of the room immediately to inform the nurse who had the patient that he had died. She asked me to come with her to check the patient because she had been having creepy vibes every time she went in there. I agreed, and we went. She did the assessment where you listen for a full minute. When she was done, we heard knocking on the wall. She said, "See, it's creepy." I didn't think anything of it until she said, "We are on the 4th floor, and on the other side of that wall is the outside of the building." We quickly left the room. 4 of us came in there to shroud the body. In August of 2013, I visited the small town of Cloudville, Louisiana, to investigate the cellar of a tiny, abandoned farmhouse. I was drawn to this place because in 1932, a woman was murdered here, and in 1933, her husband mysteriously vanished. While this situation alone was not of particular interest to me, the story surrounding it captured my attention. The following is the history behind the haunted candle of Cloudville as I have come to understand it. In 1932, the farmhouse was owned by Adam and Emily Benoit. Adam was a farmer, a hard man, and not a particularly likable one. Although he did run a successful farm, he was also an alcoholic and spent most nights at the local pub. His wife Emily was a quiet woman who had no social ties, and instead spent all of her time at home, alone. In June of 1932, Emily was found murdered in the cellar. Police records state that she had been struck from behind with a blunt object. They were able to determine that she did not die immediately. She had crawled from the place of impact to the back of the cellar. In her outstretched hand was a candle holder. It would have been the only source of light. Adam Benoit was naturally listed as the primary suspect, but he had an alibi. He was with his friend that night at the pub. The friend was a local drunkard with a less than stellar reputation, but nevertheless, Adam's alibi was accepted. The murder of Emily Benoit, to this day, remains unsolved. Early in February of 1933, Adam Benoit was reported missing. He had not been seen at the pub for several days, which was very out of the ordinary for the recent widower. Police investigation led to the cellar in which Emily had met her demise. The lead officer wrote that he had heard a man sobbing, but he found the cellar to be empty. The only sign that anyone had been there was a single candle burning against the back wall. The officer also wrote that upon extinguishing the candle, the sobbing faded. It's also in the record that the police officer found the word alone carved into the wall. The whereabouts of Adam Benoit also went unsolved. He was never seen again. The following year, in 1934, the farmhouse was purchased by a man named John Morell. When he was not seen or heard from in several weeks, police officers once again were led to the cellar to investigate. They found the exact same candle, flickering dimly from the shadows. The officers once again reported hearing a man sobbing, and noted having seen the outline of a female form in the weak light. When the candle was extinguished, the voices stopped, and the woman's shadow disappeared. Once again written on the wall was the word alone, only written out 3 times, rather than just the one. Like Adam Benoit, John Morell was never seen or heard from again. The farmhouse to this day, still in his name, fell into disrepair. When I visited the farmhouse in 2013, I had every intention of exploring the cellar. The building had long been abandoned, so I broke the lock and cautiously ventured inside. I found everything to be completely untouched. Dusty wine bottles still filled the shelves. Old, rusty tools were piled in a corner. At the back of the cellar, I found a candle covered in dust and burned almost to the end. All over the walls of the cellar, across the ceiling, across every inch of surface, was the word alone. As I had expected, the word was written in 2 distinct styles, and I had come prepared. I compared the writing to that of Adam Benoit's journal, as well as John Morell's signature on the deed. I'm no expert, but the 2 styles appeared to me as identically matching the samples that I had brought with me. There's no way that this wasn't the writing of the 2 long-banished men. In my curiosity, I lit the candle. Softly at first, then growing louder and louder, I heard the sobbing, the sounds of loss, of despair, the weeping of those abandoned to an eternity of nothingness. And in the shadows, the figure of a woman slowly drifted into view, dancing toward me. I quickly extinguished the flame and left the cellar. But of course, I brought the candle with me. The haunted candle of Cloudville has sat quietly in my collection for several years now. Only once since that day have I lit the flame. I was in my attic among my collection, and almost immediately I heard the quiet sobbing of 4 souls lost in time. I snuffed out the flame. The next day, carved into a rafter in my attic, I discovered a single word. You guessed it. It said, alone. As a kid growing up, I dealt with anger problems and would always let my emotions get the best of me, so my mom would always send me off to these residential programs. However, they weren't all that bad. If you did good, you could go on these what they called passes. It's when if you do good, you can come home for X amount of hours. So I was doing good, and already had been on a few of these passes, and I got to come home for 48 hours. It was Halloween and me, my mom, my sister, and a couple of friends got together and went to this haunted house. So when we arrived, there's a line of people who are waiting to enter, and I had to take a leak really bad because I had sat in the car for hours waiting to get there. I walked to the side of the building, and there's nothing but woods literally growing next to the building, like there were tree branches leaning against and on the structure. So, as I was taking this long leak, I heard something step on a couple of sticks, and I noticed a dark shadow figure on all fours creeping up toward me. It looked kind of like a human on all fours, but this was definitely not a human. Like I said earlier, I've dealt with a lot of problems during my childhood. I didn't even have a childhood, so I was very different from a lot of people in so many ways. I didn't have a big reaction to it. I just kind of watched it and made sure that I wasn't seeing things. I tried to keep an eye on it and called my friends over to where I was to get a look. They were caught up in a conversation though and weren't paying attention, so I tried to run over to get them and get their attention and then run back to make sure this thing was still there. By the time I got them and ran over to the area, there was nothing. This thing had disappeared without a trace. I couldn't even explain to them what just happened. They didn't pay much attention to me after that. A couple of weeks went by and I just forgot about it and let it be. So I don't know how many people really believe in ghosts or the paranormal, or in people who say that they can see them. I would never say that I'm some professional psychic or medium. I'm not. I just know that I've always been able to see things that other people couldn't, hear things other people couldn't, and knew things that other people didn't. Pretty much my whole life. I felt like a freak and a weirdo for a long time until I just realized this is happening and it isn't going away, so I needed to accept it. I got help from professional mediums and the woo-woo community, and it helped. Backstory, but important. I was laying in bed in my room a couple years ago, trying to fall asleep. It was a long hallway and my sister's room was at the end, and so was my mom's. My sister had a friend over who was dealing with an abusive boyfriend, and they were drinking and talking about it. This will also be important. You know how you get that feeling that someone's watching you? Or that feeling in a store when you just know that someone has stepped into your space? You don't have to look, you just know. That's what I felt. I looked up, and there's some girl with just her head poked into my room sideways. I just saw her head sideways leaning past my door frame. She looked shorter, maybe 20s, with long black hair, kind of like the girl from The Ring. I'm looking at her wondering what she wanted, and she started to smile. Slowly, her eyes got huge and black, and her jaw unhinged into this giant, sick, pitch-black grin. Ice cold slammed into the pit of my stomach as I just stared at her for what felt like hours, frozen in fear before what I'd been taught kicked in, and I made her leave. She instantly turned back to normal and skipped off down my hallway toward my sister's room. I thought, oh, is it my sister's friend? Depression and abuse and all those bad situations can really attract those types of beings, so I didn't think anything of it. Fast forward to literally last night. It's been years. My parents got divorced, which is a whole other post of creepy shit. I realized it wasn't just my dad who was the narcissist. It's absolutely my mom, too. They were a toxic pair, and currently, I'm in a situation where I have to live with my mom. It's fine, it's free. I'll be grateful and deal with it. Last night I'm laying in my bed watching TV, minding my own business. Suddenly I feel that feeling again. It's always the same feeling regardless of what type of ghosty it is. For me, anyways. I look at my door, and it's the exact same girl. I asked her what she was doing here, and she didn't respond. She just started smiling. Only this time her eyes went white, and her mouth grew into the same huge black grin, but she had tons of teeth like a shark. I get up to get my incense, which drives them out, and she runs in the direction of my mom's room. I go out into the hallway to look in that direction, and I see through my mom's cracked door this weird demon girl literally sitting crouched on top of my mom, staring at me. Almost like she was an animal claiming her prey. It was wild. I've never ever seen anything like that before. I also realized that this girl was never with my sister's friend. She was with my mom for however many years. But my mom's a crazy and very, very negative person regardless of what anyone does to help her. She loves drama and loves being a victim and loves complaining, so it's matching her energy, I guess. This ghost girl feels more like a bully than anything truly demonic. Like she had fun picking on people, which my mom absolutely does too. This ghost girl can't hurt me. She's just around, and man, it sure is scary when she is. She looks like an absolute demon, that's for sure. I've since seen other types of entities in her room at night while she slept, and have told her about it. She says I'm crazy at first, and then in the days that follow, she'll tell me how it feels dark. It all started when I was 5 or 6 years old and had an imaginary friend called Bombo. He was a small Victorian boy who lived with his mother, who I said lived under the floorboards, in the house that I grew up in. I used to talk and play with him all the time, teaching him about things like my Velcro shoes and some of the toys that I had. It was no secret to my family who Bombo was, and even what he looked like, or at least from how I had described him. One day my sister, who was 14 years old at the time, went back upstairs to our shared room after a family day out, and saw him standing in the corner of the room staring at her. He was exactly how I had described him, even down to the detail of his clothes. A few years passed, and I was now 10 or 11 years old. Our family had moved house a couple of times, and now lived in a 3-story house in a village just outside my hometown. I always had a weird feeling about that house from the moment we moved in, but didn't think much of it over the excitement of having my own room on the top floor that had a skylight. After a few months, things started to get strange. My things would disappear, I would hear footsteps on the middle floor landing at night, etc. These experiences progressively ended up getting stranger, with sounds like nails being dragged up the railings on the top floor getting worse and worse, as well as some nights my little sister, who was 3 at the time, screaming, saying that there was a man growling at her in her room, although my family put that down to an overactive imagination and didn't really think anything else of it. It was quiet for a couple of months, before everything came back again. This time, it was much worse. This was the first time I saw it. One night I was in my room watching TV and getting things ready for school the next day. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a face peering in at me through my skylight. Its skin was dark, and its eyes were white with no pupils, only veins, dark circles around its eyes leading to black cracks across its face. It was grinning at me, and even without pupils, I knew that it had its eyes locked on me. Needless to say that after a few seconds of initial shock, I ran downstairs to the rest of my family and refused to go back into my room. Shortly after this, my older sister, who had given birth recently and was living with us temporarily, had her own experience. As she was sleeping one night, she heard a knock on her door between 2 and 3 a.m. Thinking I was the one knocking, she shouted, "What?" twice, with no response. The door flung open after a few seconds with such force that the dresser had dented the door from the impact. No one was there. Shortly afterwards, we moved again for personal reasons to the house that we have now been in for years. For years, there was no unusual experiences other than the occasional sound of footsteps. Nothing that could be logically explained. When I was 18, my sleep schedule was the same as any teenager, waking up around noon and going to bed around 3 to 4 a.m. This one night in particular, I was up doing the same as always, listening to music, watching films, etc. At midnight, I went downstairs to the kitchen as usual to get some snacks. On my way back out of the kitchen, I saw it again. It was standing behind the front door looking in through one of the glass panels. It was the same face that I saw all those years ago. Same skin, same eyes, same dark circles and cracking features. It was staring right at me, this time with one of its hands leaning on the other glass panel as it watched me. The only difference was that this time it wasn't grinning. After standing there for what felt like an eternity, I ran as fast as I could up to my room and locked myself inside. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Some family friends who were regular churchgoers theorized after they heard what I saw that this thing that I saw was Bombo, or what had taken the form of him in the first place. And that when I had stopped giving him my attention and energy, he had then tried to use another way of getting my attention. I don't know what to think for sure. All I know is that what I saw was the exact same thing that I saw as a child, and it came back. It's been 4 years since the last time I saw it, and I hope I never see it again. I was home alone on Thanksgiving. It was 2015 around evening time, and I heard some knocking. Being in a festive and playful spirit, I opened the door without looking, and automatically felt a deep sense of regret, sort of like a literal, "oh shit" moment. I didn't know where it was coming from until I actively started trying to place what was wrong with the situation, and that's when I realized they didn't have any whites in their eyes. For a second I thought, isn't Halloween over? And was confused until the oldest boy made eye contact with me. And that's literally when I felt like I was staring death in the face. They wanted to come in, and the way they spoke made it seem like they knew what I was thinking and were actively mocking my helplessness. I slammed the door on them, turned all my lights on, and started watching TV while they stood outside and would occasionally knock. I felt like I lost a good 6 hours of time because I don't even remember when I fell asleep or what I was last watching. I remember when I first sat down, Gabriel Iglesias was playing, but I don't remember anything. When I woke up, it was around 2 a.m., and the lights were all off, and there was only static on the TV. I have Dish Network, and there were no power outages in my area, and I don't get static if Dish were to go out. I would get a channel listed as an HDMI and a black screen, or it would be the introduction screen where it would show two people talking about the features of Dish Network. Also, if the lights went out, they would come back on. I had to literally switch the lights on and off a few times for it to work, but no one was home. After that, I would occasionally see them outside, and every time it would be pin drop silence, and my lights would occasionally go out or something would lose power like my dish. One time my phone that was at 63% dropped to 1% in 5 minutes. After a few months of being afraid of every knock, I decided to call an imam to bless the house. I also saged the house and brought a lot of different surahs, psalms, to put in every room, including the bathrooms. Since then, the visits have stopped. However, a few months after that, I remember hearing a blood-curdling scream and a banging sound on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing. A few months ago, maybe 2 or so, my mom and I heard a banging coming from the front door, and same thing. No one was there. I don't know if it was them, or something coming back, or just kids playing a prank, but I was so terrified. About 5 years ago, I had just moved into a new house with my wife at the time. We had 2 kids, ages 2.5 and 1. My 2.5-year-old was very articulate for his age, and so one day as we were walking out the front door, he points across the house and asks, "Mommy, who's that little girl right there?" Well, my wife and I just kind of froze, because he was the kind of kid that had never made up any imaginary friends, or anything like that. But the moment passed, and we kind of forgot about it. Around 6 to 8 months later, I remember I was in my bedroom late at night. I have a large window in my bedroom that looks out into my backyard. I also had a couple strings of lights overhead that illuminated the yard perfectly. One night I was up studying for a class the next day when I looked outside and saw that my kid's swing set had one swing going back and forth in a perfect pendulum motion like someone was on it, while the swing next to it was dead still. This was not the first time this has happened. It was actually the third, I think. But it was the instance that I remember the most clearly and took the most notice. I honestly have no idea why I didn't think to tell my wife or to take a video, but I just stood there in the window and watched it for a couple minutes, and it kept up perfect consistency. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out to my deck to get a better look. Still swinging. I had been studying lots of science classes at that point, so my head was in the space of, I'm going to figure out the rational explanation of why this is happening. It was breezy out, so I walked up to the swing set and held my hand in different places around the swinging swing, and no breeze. Plus, again, the swing next to it was dead still. Also, my thought was that if it was the wind, there was no way that it could keep a perfect back and forth motion. If a swing gets even a little off, it would have collided with the one next to it. Anyway, I'm not sure if I had a previous encounter with my son in mind or not, but I had a very certain feeling at that moment that there was a little girl swinging on the swing. Almost like I could see her, but obviously couldn't. I also felt very at ease and not frightened at all. Then after about 5 to 10 minutes, I stopped the swing just to see what would happen, and it remained stopped. I remembered apologizing out loud to the girl for stopping the swing, and told her that she could swing whenever she wanted to, but it never happened again after that, and I haven't had any additional encounters at this house since. I looked up public records and asked the landlord if there was ever any little girl that had died in this house, and nothing. The only info that I could collect is that a few years before we moved in, there was an elderly woman who lived here for about 20 years, but the owner had the landlord kick her out in fear that she would die on the property, so she had to move in with family a few states away. Anyways, I would love to hear your thoughts on this one. I was around 7 years old when this encounter happened. I was visiting my aunt and uncle's old house for dinner and a movie at their place. They reside in this town about 1 hour west of the city that I live in. It was around 10 p.m. and the sun had set. Darkness permeated the outdoors. I remember laying down on the couch watching a film, but I was half asleep. Before I intended on sleeping, I felt the urge to go urinate, so I made my way to the hallway leading to the bathroom. This is when things started to get weird. The hallway in the house has 2 doors on the left-hand side, and 2 doors on the right-hand side, followed by the bathroom door, which is straight ahead. The first door on the left was for storage, the second being my aunt and uncle's bedroom. The first door on the right led to the basement, and the second to the guest room. Before I made my way to the bathroom, I had the urge to look inside my aunt and uncle's bedroom, and I was in complete shock at what I saw. There was the silhouette of a slender figure dressed in what appeared to be an all-black dress suit, although it could have been anything, as this figure was darker than the darkness surrounding it. The thing was nearly 7 feet tall, but was not wearing a hat, and I couldn't make out any facial features. There was no way it could have been my family members, as they were all in the living room still watching the movie. As I was standing there in silence, the figure barely budged, and I just went on to do my business. As I left the bathroom, I looked back to see if this figure was there, and sure enough, it was gone. I bolted down the hallway and plowed my face into the pillows in fear. When my family asked why I ran into the couch like that, I mentioned that it was because I saw a ghost or something. They didn't think much of it at the time, thinking that kids, just have their imaginations. But I know what I saw. I grew up in the country in North Carolina. I lived up in the woods where there used to be a water mill. A family lived there back in the 40s. The parents had 2 daughters and 1 son. Unfortunately, one of the daughters got caught under the water wheel and drowned. Ever since I was a kid, I always heard humming and low singing in the woods when I was out tromping around. But one thing that really scared me one night is when I was older. I worked for the sheriff's office, and I had left work early one night due to being over on my hours. I got home around 2:30ish, and when I pulled up, I saw the figure of a little girl standing right beside my garage. When I got out of my car, she was gone. The next experience I had was when I was out hunting in the same woods. It was super quiet, a beautiful fall evening. I had just gotten down into my stand when all of a sudden I started hearing the same humming and singing I had heard multiple times over the years. But then I heard what sounded like someone walking toward me. I looked around everywhere and couldn't see anything. Then I heard a laugh, but not the same laugh as before. So as I was climbing down my tree stand, a rock hit my boot, and once again I heard the laughing. Now mind you, the area where I was hunting was about 3 miles deep in the woods, and there was no one around. I brought my brother and cousin and a few friends down there one night, and we were gonna just sit and listen and see if we could hear anything. We were down there playing cards, joking around, when all of us heard what sounded like someone in distress. We all got quiet and listened, and we could hear what sounded like someone breathing heavily. And the thing that confuses me about that night was if it was the little girl or something more dark. Sometimes I think things are better left alone. I work in a place with 5 floors and a basement. It used to be a house for nuns and priests. I have divided the story into small parts describing everything I've seen on each floor. I got called up for a night shift since a colleague called in sick. I've never done a night shift here, so I took up the opportunity to see what it was like. 4th floor. Doing your rounds isn't the creepiest thing at all. The creepiest thing is going down the stairs again. You will see a black figure walking the hallway. Just your average shadow, Well, thing is, the lift sometimes randomly goes to that floor during the night, as if someone is calling it. 3rd floor. Doing your rounds gets a little weirder here, since it seems as though you aren't alone whilst on the floor. You will hear footsteps and see shadows on the wall walking past you. 2nd floor. Exactly the same as 3rd floor, except for one painting. It has a woman in it that sometimes changes position or even completely disappears. First floor. You will sometimes hear the piano play a D note on the floor above you. Main floor. There is a black leather couch in the hallway where you will sometimes find a see-through man sitting with a cigar and newspaper. He smiles and disappears when you greet him. Basement. The helpful poltergeist resides here. This is the place where, before my current company took up the building, the morgue was. There currently are our storage rooms, but the rooms aren't marked with what is in them. But that doesn't matter, because the night shift always gets knocks on the door to indicate where the item is. I want to preface this by saying that I am incredibly skeptical when it comes to anything about the supernatural. I tend not to trust anything without scientific evidence. That being said, these experiences I cannot explain away. Beginning in 2014, early 2015, I worked in offshore Louisiana and lived in St. Bernard Parish, where I'd rented a home. My younger sister and her 3 children were also living with me, as she and her husband were having marital problems and had separated. I was only home half the month because my job required me to be out for a week, then home for a week. Whenever I was home, my sister would tell me weird things were happening to her and her kids. She couldn't describe it, but had decided that it was paranormal, as many of us do when faced with something that we can't explain. She told me things were happening like locked doors flying open, then closing again. That if anyone was taking a shower, the lights in the bathroom would flicker on and off the entire time. I chalked it up to her having anxiety about being alone in the house. One night, as I lay in bed, however, I felt a weight pressing down on my legs. I assumed that it was my sister or one of my nephews. I raised up, half asleep, certain that I was about to see the face of a child staring back at me. Instead, all I saw was the concave indentation at the foot of my bed, indicating that something was on it. Whatever it was halfway on my legs and halfway on the mattress, as if it were straddling me. I was completely exhausted from the prior weekend, too tired to react more, moved my feet. As I pulled my legs up into a kind of fetal position, it did occur to me that moving them was difficult. It was almost as if a full-grown man were sitting on top of them. The room I was sleeping in, I had chosen because it had its own bathroom. Later that night, I got up to go in there and could have sworn that I heard a male voice saying, "Get out." It was immediately followed by a loud bang from the kitchen. Nervous, I tiptoed in the direction of the sound. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate, taking care not to wake my sister and her kids who were sleeping in a room close to the kitchen. She had also heard the noise, though, and had come out to see what it was. My garbage can, which was under the sink, had been thrown across the room where it landed beside the television in the living room. Seconds later, my oldest nephew came sprinting from their room, crying and screaming that someone was in there with him and had pushed him and his sister off of the bed. I ran to the room where my sister and kids were, hoping to see nothing. Before I could make it through the doorway, though, I was knocked off of my feet by an unseen punch to my chest. Suddenly, everything we had sitting on the island in the kitchen began flying in every which direction. I got to my feet, yelling at my sister to help me get the babies. With one of the boys in my arms, I ran to my room to grab my phone and car keys. As we entered, every single item that I had in the room was laying on the floor in a big pile. Books, bedding, even my television, which was attached to the wall. Needless to say, we got out of there fast. We completely moved out the very next day. While packing up our stuff, I called the homeowner and told him that we were leaving. When I gave him my reason, I expected him to laugh hysterically at me. He didn't. He wasn't surprised at all. I'm sure he's either been through it himself or had another renter prior to me who had the same encounters. I've never experienced anything like that before or since. My sister and I never spoke of it again. Anyway, that's my haunted story. Stay safe, everyone. I'm a die-hard agnostic skeptic with an open mind. I believe that anything is possible, but I want a logical and preferably scientific reason behind that anything. The last 10 days, however, have been absolutely insane. It started when I was a little kid. In my memories, I see kids between the ages of 5 and 11 with solid black eyes and smiles too big for their faces. I had a bad childhood, so I just figured they were added memories by an imaginative mind, because that's the answer that solidly fits my skeptical scientific worldview. Last month, I started seeing a girl. She told me about her experiences with sleep paralysis and shadow people. I explained to her that it was a rational experience caused by being in a hypnagogic state. Then she brought up the Cheshire Cat kids. Her recollections matched mine as a child. It was unnerving to say the least, and she and I spent almost an hour discussing the most minute details about them. Our stories matched. So, she does acid with her friends about 10 days ago, and told me that she stepped outside. A group of 6 of them were waiting for her. They showed her scenes from my life that were my darkest. She described them to me too accurately for her to have heard them from a second-hand source, which would be hard to do anyway, considering that I don't like sharing such detailed information. They then told her that I was going to die soon, and that she should stay away from me. This has put a monkey wrench into one of the most promising relationships of my 25 years. Since that night, I have nightmares of them coming into my room, licking my forehead, and showing me the memories of my past as if they were happening in that moment, complete with smells, sounds, sights, etc. I have written this part off as my subconscious mind reacting with my long-dormant PTSD, but they got more and more vivid. While this is happening, she has been distancing herself more and more. Last night was the weirdest part of the tale, however. I was driving down a windy country road to calm myself, and a pair of headlights flies from around a bend and runs me off the road, almost into a tree. When I looked, however, there was no car, and the headlights extinguished after passing me. I'm chalking all of this up to anxiety-started delusions and possible schizophrenia, but I cannot explain how she knew what she did, and why all of this is suddenly happening. I was 14 at the time this happened. I had just moved downstairs because I wanted more privacy, as my parents were always checking in on me. I've always been a rebellious kid and wanted to be alone and do my own thing, without anyone telling me not to. I had always noticed strange things happening around my house, and I kept asking my parents if they were going through my stuff in my room. They would always say no, so I always brushed it off. These things still happen to me to this day, like things being moved and waking up in a cold sweat, with no explanation. One night I was on my phone and I felt this feeling of dread and anxiety come over me. I then heard a voice say, "It's okay," and I looked up and a black silhouette of a woman was standing at the foot of my bed. She had no face, but I could clearly see the outline of a petite woman just standing there. I remember feeling very scared, but also very calm at the same time. I was looking at her for 15 seconds before she vanished. I told my parents what had happened, and they were also scared because my dad would always say that he felt a presence in the house. I instantly moved back up to the main floor. I remember telling people about it, and I would always remind them that my parents built the house, so there were no previous owners. People have given the idea that it was my grandma who passed away a year before this happened. I still question if this is true. I've not had anything that intense happen to me again. I still have the nightmares, and also question what she meant. Why was it okay? I remember telling that to myself over and over. I'm thinking of moving back down soon, but for now, I think I'm good. A few years ago, me and a buddy from the army decided to meet and catch up. We decided on the date and place. After several hours at the local pub, it was 3 a.m., we had 3 beers each and decided to go pay our respects to a friend of ours who had died a few years ago and was with us in the army. We bought a bottle of our friend's favorite booze and drove toward the graveyard. When we got there and started to walk toward the gate, we both saw someone standing there. As we got closer, I could definitely recognize the very friend that we were going to visit. He was standing there in his uniform holding a rifle and was waving at us to come closer. I was incredibly freaked out by what I was seeing. I just turned to my friend and looked at him and asked him if he was seeing the same thing. He was so shocked that he couldn't even talk and was just nodding his head with his mouth open. We backed away slowly and went back to the car, and drove away as fast as we could from there. Where I'm from, they say never go close if you see the dead calling you over. But ever since that day, I keep hearing someone call my name behind me when I'm all alone. At first I thought it was my wife messing with me, but that's not possible, because it's a male voice. Once again, I'm really freaking out. A few times I left my phone recording on all night to prove to my wife that I'm not going insane. But every time I do it, there's zero evidence. Just static and me and my wife snoring in the background. It's been about 8 months since this incident. I still remember it clearly. It was around 10 o'clock in the morning. My mom was in the bathroom taking a bath, so we can say that I was the only person in the house with my dog. I was feeling thirsty, so I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water and my dog followed. When I turned around after drinking the water, I saw a shadow figure. It was completely opaque, pitch dark, and had a full humanoid form. It ran from the gallery in the room that was parallel to me. At that moment, my dog started barking wildly and ran into the same room. I had a pug, and we all know pugs don't usually bark that much, but at that moment he was barking too much. I froze, wondering what to do, and when I came back to my senses I sprinted, took my dog, and locked myself into a room. Even after locking ourselves in, my dog was still growling. When my mother came out, we checked the whole house, but we couldn't find anyone. 2 months after that incident, my dog died. I was making rounds in the dark hall of the nursing home, mostly to help out with incontinence and bathroom breaks. There's only 1 aide per hall. I went into the room of 2 ladies. One was sound asleep, the other was awake. She had some slight dementia. The curtains are attached to the ceiling for privacy, much like a hospital. I went into her side of the curtains, leaving a small gap open, and told her that I was there to help her. She said, "Okay, but can you please close the curtains all the way? I don't want him to see us." I immediately got goosebumps and asked, "Who?" And she said, "The man right there with the hat," and I followed her pointed finger